Hello everyone, this is Caillou, and welcome to a review of Scriptures of Urshad for the MSEM format. Scriptures of Urshad is a set by Matt, and it's essentially based around the idea of the development of civilization, set in like Mesopotamian, Sumerian, Babylonian, that kind of general aesthetic and kind of cultural inspiration. In fact, the original name of the set was Babylos, but has since been renamed to Scriptures of Urshad. So I want to throw it to Pip to talk a little bit more about the general lore of the set before we get into talking card by card.
All right, so have you ever wanted to shoot Moses in the face and thus exile him through his indestructibility? Well, I have a set for you. In general, Scriptures of Urshad really draws heavily on kind of what I would think of as middle school history, roughly. Like Cradle of Civilization, um, as mentioned, Ancient Babylon. There's a lot of references to the Old Testament in here. And in general, it also kind of draws on civilization like the game. Discoveries, which we'll get to in the mechanical section, feel a lot like kind of progressing along a tech tree. In general, the set flavor wise feels uh, it feels more realistic than most kind of medieval fantasies, and is mostly offsetting that by virtue of having orcs and goat people and similar things.
Yep.
Also, there's five gods.
Yeah, well, and we'll be getting to a
Six.
few of those gods, unfortunately. Not all of them,
I
maybe.
don't consider Anku a god. He's a false god. He's a
Yeah,
loser.
he may have God in his type line, but is he really?
Anku does not interact.
Okay, I don't think this is the place for a religious schism at the moment.
And that's Kevin, who I'm going to be throwing it to talk about the mechanics of the set.
Hey, Scriptures of Urshad has three notable named mechanics. The first one is Urshad. It's Assault.
Off to a great start.
Assault is a keyword found solely on creatures and reads when this creature attacks, if it has no +1/+1 counters on it, you may pay its assault cost and put a counter on it. Uh, kind of like adapt, but very aggressive. And generally, creatures with assault will do something when they assault. The second one is civilized, which reads is essentially an ability where if you control an artifact, a creature, and an enchantment, whatever you're playing has some additional effect. Notably, we already kind of technically have this mechanic in MSEM under Concord, which is if you control four or more different permanent types. But if you're civilized, you have Concord unless you're playing manaless decks.
I I think it's important to note that if you have civilized, you have Concord, but if you have Concord, you don't necessarily have civilized.
True, there is a tribal and
Does
planeswalkers and such.
planeswalkers exist?
Planeswalkers
Yay!
are the big one.
Sweet. Was
Finally,
there one
we
more?
Yeah,
yeah,
there's
finally we have
discoveries.
discoveries, which are enchantments that uh, function similar to sagas. However, upon reaching their third chapter, instead of something having some big effect, they instead stick around and provide some kind of static benefit. And yeah, those are the three main mechanics. There's some general mechanical sub themes like uh, treasures to kind of represent currency. Elementals pop up here and there, but those are the three notable mechanics that kind of cover the whole set. And I think Dodger, start us off.
Hey, I got you. Okay, so our first card is going to be Calming Dramorix. It is a 2 mana 1/3, and it negates all abilities that would trigger from permanents entering the battlefield. And the most important part of the card is that it's both an antelope and a camel, which I think is pretty cool. But I believe this is a card that's already in Canon Magic, right? It's
Is
a
it
Nikolai.
Tokatli?
Yeah, it's Tokatli Sunkeeper, something like that.
Tokatli Honor Guard. But
Honor
that's
Guard, yeah.
only for creatures. The fact that this is hits
Oh,
permanents is
true.
kind of
Okay.
relevant.
Yeah. Actually, very relevant
It does
because
shut down all O rings, for instance.
yeah. And I think in a GP like GP Lafayette, this would have been a very relevant sideboard tool against, for example, the Wanderfall deck that won the GP. Because this does just turn off all landfall triggers.
I think this card would be a way bigger deal, especially because we didn't have this sort of effect at anything less than 3 mana. 3 mana gets you Chains of Subdual, which has some nice extra text on it, and any deck can play it. But this is the sort of effect that the sooner it comes down, the better, because you really want to get it out ahead of decks starting to set up their value engines. And it being 2 mana is a huge deal. The issue is, I think Ethereum Abrogator, which entered the format at the same time, is just better than this. I think you almost would always rather be on Ethereum Abrogator unless you're specifically worried about reinventing our style decks, which is a fair concern. But I think the
Or
fact that,
pre-nerf Intrepid.
yeah, the fact that Abrogator is a 2/1 flyer instead of a 1/3 stuck on the ground is a huge deal.
I don't necessarily think that this is strictly worse than Abrogator because if the meta is aggro focused, like this is potentially a very good blocker.
This definitely feels more sideboardable, while Abrogator feels more mainboardable, is how I would put it. Because I think generally the proactiveness of Abrogator is what it really pushes it ahead, I think.
Yeah, and I also think some cards like perhaps Ostracizer Orb might end up seeing more play as well, which might give you a little bit of nuance where maybe you prefer the Dremorix to the Abrogator. So I think
But
both are
wouldn't you want
playable, but Abrogator is probably better in a vacuum.
I was gonna say, if you're in white, why wouldn't you just also run Ostracizer's Orb? And then you definitely want to run Abrogator because it doesn't turn off your Orb.
Well, I mean, not every deck would want Ostracizer Orb in that slot. Maybe you want Out of Body Experience or Journey's End or some other removal spell. But if you are running Ostracizer Orb in the same deck, obviously you would prefer Abrogator. 100% agree.
All right, let's move on to Founding Hero.
Sweet.
So Founding Hero is a Savannah Lions, 1 white for a 2/1, but has an upside, which is when it attacks, if you are civilized, i.e. you have an artifact, creature, enchantment, it gains double strike until end of turn. So MSEM has a decent pedigree of 1 mana 2/1s, but the fact that this is a soldier is very relevant. We have some soldier tribal stuff seeded into the format, and a lot of our 1 mana soldiers don't really have other upsides. I don't know how easy this is to enable in an aggro deck. I think the answer is it's kind of hard, but it's also one of those things like if you do enable it, this card's the actual nuts.
So I actually built a civilized aggro deck and played it in the league. I think I went 3-2 with both my losses being to Simon. But I didn't include this card, which I think may have been a mistake. The reason I didn't include it is because I wanted every card in the deck to, or as many cards as possible, to contribute 2 types. So the fact that this doesn't contribute any types by itself meant that I ended up going with 1-drops like Stalked Healer and Tide Hollow Lich. But I think there's probably a place for this card in the deck, especially since the whole premise of the deck was to try to just rush people down and then finish them off with Reach. And if you are playing a 1-drop on turn 1, this is like one of the best 1-drops to be hitting face with, assuming you're enabling it.
Yeah, if you can do like old Allgroove Champ stuff with this, you're feeling pretty good. Like I think if the artifact you're having is an equipment, and then you have aura shapers that you could that incidentally are just good on their own, but then you can drop them onto this bad boy if they come down after him. Seems like a good time.
Yeah, this
Wow,
is also
yeah,
a really good
Ziggy
Vogel.
Valiant with this is amazing.
Yeah, the main thing is you're definitely offering up the big blowout potential, but sometimes I think you can just race under people, or you can play it safer and just play the aura on the aura shaper itself and still get the civilized bonus.
Yeah, so I am definitely going to be redesigning that deck because I actually felt it was pretty weak in its current iteration, and I think that this card probably should be in it upon reconsideration. Yeah. Anything else we want to say about the card, or should we move on?
Card good. try building with it.
All right, so should I take the next card, or someone else want to?
I'm gonna take it. It's
All right, sweet.
Hanaru's Courage, and this is we were just talking about auras, um, and this is a 1 mana aura with enchanted creature gets +1/+1 in vigilance, and it creates a 1/1 white soldier token with vigilance. I think the main use case of this is probably off the top of my head. I think it's good in a hypothetical Boggles deck, which has definitely had trouble in the past because of the existence of Exit as one of our best removal spells. This stymies that by creating another body that you can just sack to the Exit. So I think that's probably a good niche for it. It's also just a decent card on its own, giving 2 power and two vigilance power for 1 mana. So
The other thing that excites me about, or excites is probably the wrong word because it actually terrifies me, is the synergy this has with Featherfall Aesthetic. Um, if you've ever seen how that deck utilizes that one enchantment that makes a bunch of oxen, whose name I've forgotten.
Slapfield
Slotfield
Workgate.
Slapfield Workgate.
Yep. I'm glad we all had it at once. When you the fact that this doubles your board when you play it um, is very very relevant
Mhm.
because then you can just follow up with a second aura and the game is over.
You could
Um,
potentially go off of 4 mana. You could go Featherfall into this, and now you've got 4 creatures, and then you play another 1 mana aura, and all of
Well,
a
the thing
sudden,
is, Featherfall is now 3 mana, so that's not possible.
oh right,
well,
that's
that's
true.
what, yeah. But on 4 mana, you could do that, for instance. And also, I
Yeah,
think it makes one more, right? Because you stack the ETB, so you can get the token from this first,
that's true.
and
Yeah,
then copy the enchantment. So you end up with 6 creatures total.
yeah, that's
Oh yeah,
actually
that's
really
that's
really true.
pretty disgusting. Love
I
it.
did not think about that, but yeah. Um, I also think like if you are playing a Bogles deck, that like in the more traditional sense, this is actually a pretty nice sideboard card to include because, um, like as Caillou said, having insurance against edicts is very important, and it is not a horrible rate because you are like technically getting 2/2 worth of power and toughness for just 1 mana. Um, so yeah, I don't know. I
The,
think this exact card was in Amonkhet as a cartouche, and it was except it gave first strike instead of vigilance, and it was like niche played, I believe.
yeah, it showed up in Modern Bogles.
Yeah.
I think this is the sort of card, I'm going to slightly disagree, where I think you have to want to main deck this because having sideboard slots dedicated to cards that are kind of soft answers to strategies you're worried about is
Mhm.
not really what you want where you want to be with an aggro deck. Um, but I would also kind of expand on that and say that Vigilance is much better in a Bogles deck than you'd think, especially if there's a lot of aggro decks running around, since a 5/5 Vigilance kind of makes it very hard to lose versus other aggro decks
Right.
because you'd never get stuck in these stupid races. They always have to be crashing into your creature, and you have an Abyss rolling.
Yeah, and oftentimes one of the abilities you stack on your Bogle is lifelink.
Yeah, and then the game's over. If you have a Vigilant
Yeah.
Lifelink Bogle, aggro decks cannot meaningfully win through that.
Mhm. Yeah, fair. Okay. Should we move on to the
Okay,
next card?
yeah, Kevin, do you want to take the next one?
Sure. So, so next up we have Imperial Claim. Single white for an instant, you exile an artifact or enchantment, but then its controller creates a treasure token. This is a, give quite a bit of good artifact enchantment hate. I think this one is mainly for its exile because this one can technically hit both reinvent targets and the various gods in the format, and like killing off a colossal achievement and just giving them a treasure, I think, is a pretty good trade.
I think the other big thing about this card is the fact that it can cleanly answer something like Tide Hollow Lich. We have a
Mhm.
lot of recursion in this format, and being able to say, nope, that's not just dead, it's exiled, is very real. I think it's also better. So, going way back in time in Legacy, Zudex historically ran Path to Exile over Swords to Plowshares, even when they had access to both, because the life gain that you potentially give your opponent can sometimes be a really big deal in an aggro deck. I'm not going to say that giving your opponent treasure isn't a big deal in an aggro deck, But specifically, if you're, like red, white, burn or something, you'd much rather exile a guiding light with this than you would want to if you had green Nature's Claimant. The other thing is, since legend weaving is such a force in the meta, mostly just if Hersey decides to play it, but um, since legend weaving is something you need to keep an eye on, permanently exiling a thing so that they can't just fish it back out of their bin a little bit later is kind of real.
Yeah.
So the
I
thing I was
actually
thinking of is I was going to mention Journey's End because Journey's End just got buffed. It also hits creatures for one more mana. But then the last point that you mentioned about Legend Weaving, the fact that it shuffles it back in, suddenly becomes relevant in that scenario. So that's something I hadn't considered. But I think in general, I feel like the new Journey's End is probably going to have a place in decks over this for the time being.
I would agree, except for decks that operate on a really tight curve, because I think that the 1 mana aspect of this is a surprisingly big deal. Because oftentimes when you're bringing in a sideboard card, you want that sideboard card to disrupt your plan as little as possible. So while yes, Journey's End is more main deckable than this, I expect this to be if you are specifically putting in a card in your sideboard to deal with artifacts and enchantments, I think this is better than Journey's End.
One other thing that I would consider is the fact that sometimes you're already running 4 Journey's Ends. So, for instance, when I was playing Blacklist Assailant Control earlier, I ran a couple copies of this in my sideboard because I already had 4 Journey's End. And it felt good in the matchups where it came up.
Wait, Blacklist Salem Control?
Blacklist Assailant.
Okay.
I went
was like
04,
Salem and
so
Crypto and Control? That sounds pog.
I went 04, so I would not recommend it.
It sounds less pog.
Okay.
All right, next card?
Yeah, go ahead. Take us away.
So next card is Legacy War Mask. It is a 2-mana white equipment. It has equipped creature gets +1/+1 and equip 1, so that's like whatever. But when it enters the battlefield, you get to return a creature card with converted mana cost 2 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield, and then you can attach the War Mask to it for free. I believe this card is the fastest SOU card to elicit a nerf, although it wasn't to the card itself, it was to another card. Ryton Force Field Keeper?
Rilken.
Okay, my bad. Yeah. So basically, the reason for that is because you can sacrifice the keeper to flicker the War Mask, which then returns the keeper, and you can do that as many times as you want for 0 mana, which means your opponent is dead if you have Blood Arts in play, and that's probably a no bono. No bueno. No bono.
It's also not good, so that is a no bono.
Well, I think the War Mask is actually kind of playable by itself, honestly, because there are plenty of shenanigans you can do with Unearth being added to the meta, and sometimes you're looking for redundancy of that effect, especially if with the context of all these like civilized mechanics, and like I think there are a lot of interesting artifact synergies in the meta that haven't been fully explored. So I would not count this card out.
If I may,
even after that interaction is removed.
I absolutely love this deck for the kind of red-white Aetherize aggro, because all of your threats are 2 mana. Timestream Sentinel, Zadina Valiant, Zadina Envoy, the red-white Heirloom one. This card reanimates all of them, buffs them up. It acts as a functional redundancy for all of them. I absolutely love this card. It is just everything you want for that list, and I want to see that list get good.
That list, I think, promptly saw play in like 1 or 2 GPs and was never seen again for months, so I'm not sure if it'll come back up, but if it does, yeah, this is good there. I also, one quick comment before I get to you, Pip, is I haven't thought too hard about it, but I wonder what are the situations where you play this over Soul Blade from Worlds Away and vice versa, because I think they are superficially similar, but I feel like the roles that they fill is probably reasonably different enough that they go in different decks / don't actually clash with each other as they might seem at first glance.
I feel like they're very different cards, like extremely different cards. I think Soulblade is the kind of card you use to do weird combos with stuff like Herald of Oblivion, and the fact that you need to actually have a creature to equip it to means it goes in very different decks, even if you are playing it like quote unquote fairly. While War Mask, the fact like you can kind of think of it as a spell that leaves an equipment behind, you know. And that spell is not efficient, but it's efficient enough perhaps to be copies of Unearth 5 through 8, for example.
So, and I'm not just doing this to shill my own card, but I'm not convinced this is better than Persevere.
Mhm.
The main thing this brings to the table is leaving around a short sword, which I don't think is relevant for MSEM. Like, that is not the power level you want to be at. And the fact that it can sometimes be free to play if you're not gaining card advantage out of it, i.e. using it to cheat a creature out of your hand. Whereas Persevere's plus and plus one counters independent of the artifact. It grants indestructible. It can bring things from CMC 3 or less, and it's an instant. Like, I think this card looks better than it is.
Mhm.
I think unless you have very strong artifact synergies, you should not be considering this card.
Yeah, I would agree that Persevere is better than War Mask in a vacuum, and I don't think that's very controversial to say. I just think that this card is important to keep in mind. Either A, if you want more than 8 copies of this effect, or if you are doing some kind of fun artifact stuff. For example, like you can still infinite combo with this card if you use Wandering Bard and a sack outlet. You just need a sack outlet to sack the War Mask as well. But like, I definitely think this is a card that's worth keeping in mind.
Yeah, I think basically this is a card where I think people are going to believe it goes in more decks than it does. Like, I don't think it's actually good in the
Yeah.
red-white Xerox deck. I think this is not where you want to be. But I would believe that there are shells where this feels great.
Yeah, sure. I buy that for sure.
Ruler of
Okay.
Cities is a bear, so 1 and white for a 2/2. When it enters the battlefield, you search your library for an aura card with enchant land, reveal it, put it in your hand, and whenever you enchant a land you control, you gain 2 life. This does kind of neat things. So the base case for this card is it finds unexplored regions, I think is what it's called.
Yeah.
Our what's the
Abundant growth.
yeah, our abundant growth. The other thing it does, which is kind of nice, is it finds Gila emergence. So that helps you kind of have it have a threat mode, and it technically has a body.
Another interesting target that's in the format is Underworld Connections, which is not like a horrible silver bullet if you're already running this to get your abundant growths. But sorry, you can finish your thought.
Yeah, I guess my main concern is I think this card is likely to bait you into thinking that it is better than it is, because I think for the most part this is a very standard card. Like, it provides value, it provides a toolbox, it can trade with an aggro creature. That's not really what MSEM is about. The toolbox it provides is generally clunky cards you don't want to be running in your deck if you can avoid it, and the life gain it provides is not super relevant. And the 2/2, like, sure, congrats, you can trade with aggro's 1-drops, but that's not really where you want to be.
Especially
So,
when some of those 1-drops are also recursive. They're in black, where
yeah.
it's like, okay, cool. I've done nothing.
Um,
But
yeah.
I would like to appreciate this man's abs before we move on. Great abs. Great abs, great beard.
Oh,
Has
I think
the
the
art
art was.
changed?
Yeah, the art was changed.
The art was
Sadly,
changed?
no.
Yeah, no longer has abs.
Okay, you know what?
And,
But the version I have in the video has abs, so fuck all y'all
Okay,
people living in the future. I'm sticking with Ab Boy.
that's valid.
I will say that I think this card is as good as its toolbox. And right now that toolbox is not good enough. I think you needed a couple more like targets that are worth playing on their own before
Yeah,
you start
in
to
its custom standard tenure, there was a land aura that exiled a creature. So it had like it had like a removal mode. You could find up general utility, and then Heal Emergence was just a game ender. So it had like a little bit more breadth there. So I think if we get like I guess similar variety of options at an MSEM playable rate, then this card's stock goes up a bit.
Yeah. Um, I agree. Okay. Should we go to the next card?
Sounds
Yep.
good.
All right. So the next card is Queen Hanaru. Queen Hanaru is a 3 mana 3/3, and she is the first god on our list today. When she enters the battlefield or attacks, you can put a +1/+1 counter on any other creature you control. And then at the beginning of your upkeep, if you have 4 or more +1/+1 counters among your creatures, she transforms, or you may transform her if you want, into a 4/4 with indestructible. And then whenever she attacks, she puts a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control, including herself.
So our first god.
Yeah, and I think this is one of the less powerful gods, I believe, at least for MSEM. Um, you are getting 4 worth of stats when you drop her on the board, and then she adds an extra bit of stats every time. So like it is pretty good on rate, but the fact that the card kind of just gets 1-for-1 by most removal spells makes me a little less high on it than most people would be. I don't know. What are your guys' thoughts on it?
My first
Well,
thought is, oh man, double white. It makes me a little sad because I think there's a lot of red and green cards this goes great with. But also, I think there are good ways to like enable this on curve. Like, you go like I don't know, Primal Ruffian turn one, into
the
the
new red green uncommon.
yeah
The
Emirabi's disciple or whatever
Mhm.
into Hanaru. Then you have like what? At that point, I think you have something like six counters when you untap on turn four, and it's like okay, sure.
My issue with that is, or instead of splashing white, you could just play Katie.
That's fair.
Yeah.
Because I think this card compares most directly to Katie because they're both counters payoffs. I think Queen Hanaru being a threat on her own, albeit not a very good threat because she can't put the counters on herself when she enters the battlefield or attacks. But the fact that she's a threat on her own is something to distinguish her from Katie. But the fact that Katie can provide card advantage and puts more power onto the board when you play her, because if you play her and immediately downtick her, you put somewhere from you know 4 to 6 power onto the board, whereas Queen Hanaru is only ever 4 power when she comes down. And Katie also lines up better into a lot of the removal in the format, especially as Journey's End sees more
I
play.
I will say that Hanaru is much better to play off of Mana Dork than
Yep,
Katie is.
agreed there.
So
Um,
maybe
the
that's how
other
you
nice thing is
snowball.
the fact that she's a soldier is kind of nice. And also the fact she's legendary. Those are both very relevant synergies in MSEM.
Mhm.
Um, I would I basically I think you need a very compelling reason to play her over Katie, but I won't deny that those reasons exist.
Yeah. Do you think this card is good enough in decks that don't run green? Because I'm not sure I do.
Um, I think the fact that all of our best counter enablers are green makes me
Yeah.
really low on it. Like I'm trying to think of the pushed like red. I mean, I guess we have some like decently pushed experienced creatures in white, but
Hmm.
you could just
yeah,
splash you should just splash green for gathering the gang. Like they made us so good in this format that I don't understand why you wouldn't do that.
yeah, like there are some good ones like Anomaly and
But that's green.
oh
Yeah,
yes,
I think
in green white,
there's
yeah.
definitely a lot of room for various green white X spells that may want Hanaru as an option, but I think she's by no means a shoe in those strategies.
Yeah, so I think
Yeah.
all of what I'm hearing is we need to get Monsters of Chikyu into the format so that we have good experience cards so we can make mono white
Taste,
Hanaru. That is the future that we
taste
all
your
want.
shilling. This is a Cloudscape only podcast.
So have you guys heard of Tales of the Night?
um, so for our next card, here's a neat little trick. This is Sire of Empires, which is one of the very few Lamasus we're getting in custom Magic. For 1 white, it's a 3/3 flying, and it gets +1/+1 as long as you control another creature, lifelink as long as you control another enchantment, and vigilance as long as you control an artifact. So I understand people are hyped on this card and comparing it to Merciful Eroda, which is used to be a really premier card in this format, since it was a 3 mana 4/4 flying vigilance, with the slight downside of it can actually damage creatures. The fact that you need to have another creature and an artifact to make this as good as Eroda technically is in terms of air pressure, um, kind of makes me low on it. Like, I think one of the things that's really appealing about Eurota and cards like that are the fact you don't need much synergy to get them going. And the fact that Sire of Empires has a higher ceiling but a lower floor. Like, Eurota hasn't seen play in what feels like close to a year. I'm kind of not
Hey,
sold
hey,
on this
I'm
card.
not
going
sure I would
4-1 with
say it's a
Eurota.
lower floor because this can like
It's
Eurota can't kill any creatures. This can still stonewall like
Eurota
smaller
can still
things.
s- Eurota can still stonewall people. Like, your opponent needs to swing in with multiple creatures to get past
I think
your
What
0-4
Kevin means is
defender.
like it can actually threaten to reduce their board presence. But
I guess.
yeah,
Yeah.
I think the
Like,
main thing
three
that makes
toughness
me
is
attracted to this
huge.
card is the lifelink. But the problem is, I also think that the lifelink is the hardest part of this to naturally enable in the deck building process.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm
So, oh,
I
sorry.
mean
You go ahead, Joe.
like Zealot, like there are some good enchantment lands that I think like a monocolor deck could easily run.
I think the kind of just fundamental underlying issue with this card is one of those cards that MSEM players and Magic players in general are goddamn addicted to. Where it's a card that's like, it's okay, but if you add synergy, oh boy howdy, if you add synergy, then it starts to look above rate. And I, as a player, have basically made my career that doesn't pay me any money off of never playing cards unless they are individually powerful enough. But the fact that I think this card is not so much better than Eurota to see play because Eurota hasn't seen much play. Apparently has seen 20 games in the past, since May Madness, and has only won 10 of them. I assume that's basically all from Dodgers Lone Survivor builds. But
There was
yeah.
also the Obzon gathering the gang list that Augur
Oh,
ran.
that ran Eurotas?
That ran
I think it ran
Eurotas.
like 1 or 2.
Okay,
Yeah.
interesting. I don't think it would want to be on Sire of Empires over Eurota, even though it has enchantments, even though it has other creatures. One of the power of Eurota is that it's a threat on its own, and this you need to put in a non-zero amount of effort. Like, Eurota is one of those cards that, like, the drawback looks real on paper, but in practice, it it kind of just messes people up. And I think the big difference that we're not accounting for correctly here is the difference between 3 and 4 toughness in a format with multiple playable lightning strikes and scorch is just so huge. Like, aggro can just chuck a bolt at this and keep running you down. Eurota, they need to chuck a bolt and hit into it with a creature, which means Eurota buys you like somewhere on the order of 3 life.
All right. So we had our Pipsqueak lecture. Okay, you ready for your Dodger sermon?
Ooh.
Okay. So remember how Pipsqueak said, "Oh, these here synergy cards, they don't do anything by themselves." That's true. But guess what? In Magic the Gathering, you get to put different cards in your deck, and sometimes those cards make the other cards in your deck better. I think that
This is the
I
part
think
where
that
I wish I had the power to mute people's mics.
I think that
It's
this
too
card is
late,
a house.
Kaya. Just accept
Um,
it.
I think that after having played Civilized Aggro already, I think that the deck has a lot of legs, but that I probably need to tool around with the numbers a little bit. I think this is a card that has a lot of cards that are playable by themselves that do a good job of enabling this, such as 2-drop Aura Shapers, Elvish Opportunist, any artifact creature. Sights Beyond is often a card that is very good to include in Conquer decks because it's an enchantment and it also benefits from you hitting Conquered. And like, I think that there's absolutely decks you can make where this is enabled as soon as you drop it on turn. And then it's not even in bolt range ever. And like, you can very easily make this like even if it okay if you think of it like even if it's just a 4/4 flyer for 3, right? Like you'd never consider the lifelink or vigilance, like that's already a very good rate, and just having another creature is not that hard to do. Right? Especially if your deck is just full of Elvish Opportunists and Aura Shapers and stuff like that. So curving
But
into this,
in the aforementioned aggro model, you're probably trying to trade off with their early creatures or trying to block them, or chomping to them. But I guess my ultimate feeling on this is I think I'm kind of in the middle of both of these. I think that it requires some work to be put into it, but from what I've seen of it being played, I agree with Dodger that I think having another creature is generally trivial. Um, and as long as you have reliable, I think the important thing, because like, yeah, we have enchantment lands, we have this thing, but then you need to have like reliable density of cards that can enable the modes that you want. And I think that the most important part is the lifelink. I think the vigilance is really nice, and like we mentioned, like lifelink vigilance is just kind of like hoses aggro, but the lifelink I think is relevant in a surprising number of matchups, even beyond aggro. So the I think that if there are ways to consistently enable that, I can definitely see this being played over Eurota. But
At
otherwise,
the,
I
end of,
think it's yeah.
at the end of the day, I think it's very easy to enable this card. The issue is designing a deck where you can
Enabling it doesn't
enable the
reduce your
card while the
overall
deck is also
power.
yeah. And I think that's possible. It's just a bit of a puzzle.
The main kind of underlying point with my comments about synergy mostly comes from playing a lot of leagues against, various different like red white aetherize or clerics or whatever. The issue with a lot of these sorts of synergy decks is unless the synergistic cards you're running are good, as Caillou indicated, like you're not taking a power hit to try to enable a hit, you put a lot of stress on your individual cards that are meant to be your payoffs. And you really need your deck to be a large amount of payoffs in order to overwhelm control deck interaction suites. Because otherwise, what happens from experience, you name one creature with a Kincan and with a Journey to Outer Worlds, and then you try to cast that creature and they just say, cool, counter it. And you're like, oh, well, now I look like an idiot. And I think I'm willing to believe you that Sire of Empires is good enough when you cast it off like a mana dork, and now it is a turn 2 4/4, and your opponent didn't really have a chance to answer it profitably because mana dorks are good. I think to me the big questions are going to be how many incidental artifacts are there in MSEM where it doesn't feel like you're reaching, and how many incidental enchantments are there as the more important one. Because I think
Yeah.
if this card's a 3 mana 4/4 flying vigilance that can deal damage to creatures, I think that is solidly good enough for MSEM, but it does make me question like, okay, but you did have to put effort into it versus Eurota. Was that effort worth not having the downside?
Okay.
If you can't get enchantments, my opinion changes. Anyway, onto a
Yeah.
really good
Yeah,
enchantment.
I was just saying we've
Oh.
spilled a
Yeah.
lot of ink on this. I think people have their the different positions
Yeah,
laid
like
out.
Yeah,
we,
I'm
we,
not
we should put a timestamp for the Sire of Empires discourse. So yeah,
Okay, yeah.
so
So what are you saying about a really good 3 mana white double white enchantment?
Yeah, so Theocracy is the nuts. Definitely the best
Agreed.
white card in this set. Um, the fact that it enters and immediately refunds 2 of the mana you spent, and then if they don't answer it, which they're going to feel like an idiot for answering it, because then it 2-for-1 to them, it generates another 2 mana and a card, so now you're up on cards, and then it sticks around and continues to do things. That's a lot of value for a 3-drop. You're netting +1 cards and +1 mana, and that's not usually a rate you get in aggro decks. It's it conjures to mind this idea of collected company. The kind of unfortunate thing is 2 drops are a lot less powerful than 3 drops. That's just kind of how Magic works. So hitting 2 2 drops is a lot less busted than hitting 2 3 drops. On the other hand, the main issue with collected company decks is usually you have to run a bunch of 3 drops to enable it, and then also your deck now has a bunch of clunky 3 drops. Nice going, idiot. Whereas this is just no, you're playing a standard aggro deck. You play 1 and 2 drops, and then you curve into this, and it feels good every time.
how do we feel about the third static ability?
I mean,
Like
good in
So-
focus
aggro.
mainly on.
I actually played this in my civilized aggro deck. This card was by far the best card in the deck, and
Yeah.
actually the last ability is very relevant. If your opponent, it basically means that your opponent if you are on the aggressive, it means your opponent has 1 less creature, and being able to choose which 1 less creature they have every single turn is really really nice. It
Yeah,
means
for example,
like
if they have their Sire of Empires back to block.
yeah, all of a sudden it can't
No,
block.
we are not going back to that discourse.
So I think that this card is actually probably in the top 5 most powerful cards in Urshad. I don't know how much of a hot take that is, but like this card is really really good.
I'm trying to think of cards that make me like I can't think of enough cards that make me think, oh no, X card's clearly better. So I'm willing to co-sign that take.
Sweet.
I think the main thing about that final ability is you're not running this for that final ability.
Oh yeah,
That final ability is literally just a bonus. You would be running it if the card died after 2 ticks, or if it gained you
agreed.
like 2 life after 2 ticks.
Yeah,
So
the
the
thing
fact
is
that it
with
just
like
now sticks around and provides this constant pressure in terms of racing is kind of gross.
yeah, like if it
100%
was just an instant or sorcerer with rebound, like
Yeah, you'd run this.
agree. Hmm.
So, and I guess
why
my last,
so good?
I guess my question is, do we have any CMC2 creatures that can flicker on ETB? Like a flicker. I know Horizon Treader exists, but that's 3
Um,
CMC.
we we totally have Rilken Force Field Keeper, right?
Ha ha ha.
I don't
Guys.
think there's an ETB fast flicker, but there might be an ETB slow flicker.
I
Wait, do
mean,
we have an ETB proliferate creature?
or like an ETB. We have, no, Backwards Cultivator
We
is
have
LTB.
two actual. We have Realmwalker Domovoy, which is a 2/1 for 2 that does that, and it's a slow flicker. And we have
Hmm.
Shawlbinder, which is a 3/1 for 2 that slow flickers if you control a desert. Both of those are
Is,
like
yeah, Shawbinder is
Shawbinder's
good.
just a good card.
Yeah, so
Yeah,
I can see, like, I can see that, and you just get extant value from this. Like, why not?
the fact that it then just kind of rebuys itself, meaning instead of spending 3 mana for roughly 4 mana and 2 cards, you're now starting to say, well, I spent 3 mana for roughly 6 mana and 3 cards. That's starting to
Wait,
go from like good to disgusting.
wait. Now I gotta build this deck. Sweet. Okay.
Okay,
Dodger,
glad I asked
Wait,
that
let me
Dodger,
question.
respond
Dodger
after
doesn't
this.
run enough bad cards. You can't build it. It's illegal. That's against your
I'll put
contract.
I
Saguaro
see. No, no.
Titan in
So,
there.
so now you see, because you have to run
No, no,
deserts. So now you make it
Oh,
all about
Saguaro Titan. Never mind.
deserts.
You're
Yeah, we're
allowed to
there.
do it.
Yeah,
You're
we're
allowed to
no,
definitely
do it.
no.
there.
Pip. This is good. Pip, this is gonna be a time stream Sentinel deck. It's gonna have some really bad cards.
Okay.
I have enough faith in Dodger to not run Time Stream Sentinel. I don't have much faith, but I have
Anyways,
enough faith.
speaking of good 2 drops that you can potentially grab with this, Tithe Official is pretty not bad. It's 1 and a white for a 2/2 first striker, and it makes all non-creature spells with converted mana cost 4 or greater cost 1 more to cast. And coincidentally, we just nerfed 3 mana non-creature spells to 4 mana, so might be
Wait, we
something
took that
there.
off the list though, right?
Yeah,
Huh?
because this card's bad.
Oh no, we took this off the list. Well, okay, I want to talk
Yeah.
about it
Yeah,
because I
because
think that
like
in a
it
hate, I'm just
doesn't
going to quickly
hit
mention
any
that
of
I
the
think
early
that
removal.
no. I think that in a hate bears list, I think that this could potentially deserve a slot main board or sideboard. But that's all I have to say about it, really.
This just gets
Yeah.
shocked. Like,
The main issue with this card is we have so many just truly filthy hate bears at 2. Them
Yeah.
not really interested in hate bears that only mess up one matchup. First Strike does make this card a lot more real. Like, there's a reason why Thalia is good, and it's because she's not a dead card versus aggro. But if you there's just so many better ways to disrupt opponents, and you can cleanly answer this with most removal. Like it doesn't make removal into this like bad exchange rate. I don't know. I think the card is not the most embarrassing thing you could play out of this set, but it's definitely not where I would want to be. Meanwhile, we have Imperial Achievement for one. Actually, why did I say meanwhile? I
oh,
think this card sucks. Okay, someone else
Wait,
explain this card.
wait. Are we going? Are we going on to? Are we skipping Emissary of Dark?
uh,
It's marked with a
yeah.
question mark on the list.
Oh my God! I haven't been looking at the list. Okay, this is a shit show. All right, someone explain Emissary of Dark Tides.
All right, Emissary of Dark Tides. Emissary of Dark Tides is a 3 mana, 2/1 blue creature, with flash. And when it enters the battlefield, you can bounce either a non-creature spell or a tapped creature. Um, Now, this card I think is a bit dubious for MSEM power level, as is evidenced by the fact that we had it marked with a question mark. Um, there are lots of competing creatures for this kind of slot. Notably, Hexfang Aesthetic is one. Another one is Vengeful, the 3 mana 3/1 flyer. I forget the name, like the fairy. Vengeful something.
Vengeful
Vengeful
Messenger.
Magical Messenger, yeah. So like both of those cards kind of fulfill similar roles to this with a bit better rates on the body, having 3 power. Um,
And
the
evasion.
the benefit is that this can innovation, yeah. The benefit is that this can bounce a tapped creature, but I do agree that I don't think this is necessarily where you want to be in MSEM at least.
Yeah, my feeling on this card is basically if this wasn't a 2. Like 2/1 is the issue for me here. Or also the fact that it's blue 1. Like it's a very it's a very inflexible card, and while it looks like it kind of answers everything you need it to, if you're in a tempo deck, you're usually an aggro deck of some sort, in which case you really don't want to be bouncing tapped creatures because, you know, you're on the aggressive end,
Yeah.
and you don't want to just be able to answer non-creature spells. You also want to be able to, bounce their their Sire of Empires they just played, so
Yeah,
you can
this
swing it.
basically doesn't do anything against potential blockers,
Yeah,
which is, I think, pretty unfortunate given that it doesn't have evasion.
yeah, and it's a 2/1. Like if they block this with a sapling, it's dead.
Yeah. Um, okay, next card.
Yeah, let's sure.
Sweet. Imperial Achievement is a 1 blue instant. You draw a card, but if you have Civilized, you draw 2 instead.
Man,
So
Pip's definitely gonna hate this set because civilized is just synergy, the keyword.
There's some good civilized cards, I swear. These just aren't them.
I think this card is overall weak, but
Oh, thank God.
I think it is a very sweet thing to put on Icecrown Wand.
Sure, that's
So
that's kind of hype.
Yeah, I like
I think
that.
if you compare this to most other cantrips, the benefit you get from something like Opt, Monkey Shines, etc., is obviously better in a vacuum. So like the cost of running just 1 blue draw card is pretty big, and
The,
I think that what makes this really weak is that, or like the weakest part of this card is that it doesn't actually contribute towards civilized in any way, and you need to totally have um, civilized set up with other cards before you can get full value off of this.
Yeah, I think like
yeah, I
the
think a
Icecrown
better
one
thing might
Imperial
be a
Achievement thing
planet
is
far,
kind of
far away
cool.
if you're going for this kind of thing.
Yeah, I don't think this is ever going to happen, by the way, but how stupid do you feel when you go to cast this card and your opponent casts Exune in response?
Oh yeah,
Yeah, you
I
feel
mean
very sad.
you
But
feel
yeah,
very bad about that.
That just turned
because
Exune into a 2-for-1.
yeah, so I think that
That's
like
that's
it's yeah,
magic.
Sights Beyond like it itself contributes to Concord, and once Concord is online, it's drawing you a card each turn, which I think
Yeah,
quickly
so
outpaces this. So
I actually did build a deck with this card. Like the in the aforementioned Isochron Wand shell, it is a blue-black shell that uses this card, Isochron Wand, and Rail Lines as the artifacts, and then it uses Beyond and Endless Discoveries as the enchantments. Um, and then it uses Union Rail as the creature.
One thing that I think is going to be kind of awkward with putting civilized cards into Concord shells is one thing that you calculate with Concord is Concord is primarily on permanence,
Hmm.
and you consistently calculate that when you're evaluating Concord effects, where Sights Beyond, in my experience building these decks, usually makes you slightly lower on including a bunch of enchantments in your deck because you don't want to double up on enchantments when you
Yeah, that's
instead could be
true.
getting, enchantment and then another thing. Whereas Civilized basically asks you to have as much density of each of those types as you can fit into the deck. I don't think that's like a knock against the mechanic. I just think that's a deck building tension people are going to feel.
I don't think it's a knock against Civilized. I think it's just a knock on cards that require Civilized but don't actually contribute themselves, like Imperial Achievement, which is which
Yeah.
is the biggest which is the biggest knock against this card, because when you're building these kind of decks, you need a certain density of each of these different permanent types, and that makes deck building space very tough to find for stuff like this, because um, you have to just waste. It's kind of like you're wasting real estate, basically. Um,
One other brief note, before again we've declared too much ink has been spilled. I think one of the things that people frequently overestimate with cards like this is they think, well, the fail case is you draw a card. And it's like, okay, yes, technically speaking, the fact that this has 1 mana cycling does increase the power level of it. It makes it so you don't need to hit the civilized mode for it to technically be a card. The issue is I don't put 1 mana draw ones into my decks. And I don't include them for a good reason. It's because that's not actually a good card. You're spending 1 mana for no real meaningful advantage. So before we get, because I assume this show gets hate mail and Caillou just shields us all from it. But before you send us hate mail telling us that this card's great because you can just cycle it, don't play cards just because you can cycle them. That's an evergreen tweet. I'm gonna repeat that a bunch in the Olara review, I'm sure.
I was just about to say, like,
All right,
don't Derevi's adjutant, don't do it.
no, I'm going to tear that card apart when we review the set.
Okay,
All right,
the,
Caillou,
the
please
next.
tell us about the next card.
Yeah, okay. You know this one's something close to my heart. It's Invoke the Onkolates. You might be thinking, wait, that's a 6 mana sorcery. Why are you not just playing roll? And my answer to that question is, this is basically you build around this to essentially combo off. So what it is you look at the top 8 cards of your library, you take a creature, you put that onto the battlefield. You take an instant or sorcery, you exile that card, and then whenever that creature deals combat damage to an opponent, um, you copy that card and you can cast it without paying its mana cost. So essentially, what you're trying to do is you're trying to get a card with evasion and haste, ideally some form of protection as well, a density of those, and then an extra turn spell. And then you basically just take extra turns and you kill your opponent dead. Of course, the problem is even with in this format, even with protection, you are going to get hit by Exit and feel very sad and cry. Um, but that's basically the idea of the deck. And the problem is I don't think that MSEM currently has even assuming that Exit doesn't exist. I don't think MSEM's like creature suite is quite there. There's just too much interaction and not enough either speed or protection possible to make this good.
Awkwardly, I was gonna say I don't think this is particularly embarrassing. Like the hypergeometric calculations are really in favor of it. If you run 8 turns and 8 creatures, you're at like a 80% to hit either one of those things. And we have some really powerful turn spells, and we have some really good creatures. The main issue with this card is it costs 6 mana. If it costs 5 mana, I think this card would be a slam dunk, absurd card. 6 mana means you also need to include a fair bit of ramp into your deck. But I think I think the comparison to Roll is actually a really good one, because Roll's condition is if you built your deck correctly, you win when you untap. And this is if you built your deck correctly, you can actually win this turn.
Yeah, I think.
Speaking of extra turn
What
spells,
is the
by the way,
quickest? Yeah. Yeah. We'll get
Well,
there.
you can put it with an evasive haste creature, and then
Yeah,
immediately
yeah.
just
My thought
go
was,
off.
what is the earliest you can ramp this out? Let's say you go turn one dork, turn two currency, and then turn three this. That's
You
probably
can
the early.
trivially get this turn 3. I wouldn't be shocked if you could get it turn 2, but also like that means you can net +4 mana in this format. And that's probably like I don't think you can get turn 2 without like ritual is the
Turn
answer.
turn two requires some pretty magical Christmas landy hands, I
Yeah,
think.
so I think turn three, and then also
Uh
we have Chitari restoration. So yeah, turn three. This is probably the reasonable timing for this. If you're
I think an interesting thing also is that you can exile another copy of Invoke the Onkolates.
oh yeah, I've definitely done
So
that in my play with it in
oh
other
no,
formats.
that
so you get a second chance. Yeah, that's cool. Um if you okay, if you go fetch land and cast scintillate, I'm pretty sure you can Winter's Exhaustion this out on turn 2. No, because you don't have any blue mana. Never mind. All right, this plan sucks. You need another scintillate to turn some of that red mana into blue mana.
Mm-hmm. Okay, big sad. Um. Okay, but Kevin was mentioning extra turn spell, so I'm assuming that's a nod to the next card. Do you want to talk about that?
yeah, I'd love to. So, Look to the Future is 4 double blue for extra turn, exile it, and then this beautiful bit of synergy, Concord. If you have Concord, you basically get the future side effect until they
It's
end
not
of the next
Concord, my
turn.
guy. It's civilized.
Ooh.
Uh, but,
So
but yeah, interesting extra turn spell. Very weird.
there was a very extended period of time. Like I think by this point it's no longer the majority of Magic's history, but where Future Sight was considered the strongest blue permanent and like the strongest blue 5 drop in existence. And you know, Magic's changed, but it hasn't changed that much. Future Sight was still like the best card in Modern Horizons draft, other than the couple of like, oh well, if your deck is built around Palashik Mons, you win the game if you draw Palashik Mons. this card has a big hoop, and you don't usually want 6 mana extra turn effects in EDH, at least in my experience. But I think there's a non-zero chance of if you cast this, and then, you don't want to cast this when you have 6 mana, you want to cast this when you have like 10. And I think this usually then reads, 6 mana, take an extra turn, you draw somewhere around like 5 or 6 cards. And people were talking about Time in a Bottle in MSEDH before. I think this card makes Time in a Bottle look really bad, especially because this card's way easier to enable.
So I have made a MSEM deck that uses Look to the Future. It is a deck. I have not goldfish at all. I am unsure of its potential, but basically, it is a blue-green turns deck that
Does
runs
it
a lot
have
of.
Dream Sight?
It's no. So this is the non-Dream Sight version of that archetype essentially. So it slims down on a lot of the turns, and it doesn't actually try to go infinite. Whereas that deck could basically go infinite turns. Instead, it just tries to ramp up a ton of mana, cast Look to the Future, and then just do stupid things with Mabel. And maybe you can chain a couple Look to the Futures. You can cast Magicka Siphon. Um, you can hit Concord relatively easily because it runs a 4-pack of Sights Beyond and Unexplored Regions each, as well as 4 Terraformers Globe. It also runs Union Rail, so while you're chaining all this stuff, you can build up a board and like start attacking. In theory, the deck is good, but in practice, the deck is probably bad.
The one
But
thing I wish about this card is it did the tech that Buy Time had, which was it's until it's an opponent's turn you get
that's
this
true.
effect.
Yeah.
So if you could chain extra turns, the future sight would persist through those extra turns. But also, I think this card is very firmly like, yes, you should absolutely be playing it in MSEDH, and yes, if you are wacky enough, you can build for it in MSEM, but I think this is mostly an MSEDH card.
Oh yeah, it's a ridiculous EDH card for sure. Sweet. I'll take the next one, I guess.
Sounds good.
Sure.
Next card is Nemuzar's Disciple. It is a 2-mana, 2/1 with flying, and it has Civilized. Whenever it attacks, if you are civilized, you get a +1/+1 counter on it. So if you're just assuming this is always on, a 2-mana creature that attacks is a 3/2 flyer and then continues to grow by itself is obviously pretty strong, I think. And of course, it comes down to that deck building cost. How strong is it so that you're willing to warp your deck around being able to include this card? I think it's a little dicey just because generally the blue civilized decks tend to be more controlling, and this is like the one aggressive piece. So I'm unsure whether this card really has a home.
Yeah, okay, I want
But
to
it's
paint a
definitely
picture for you. So, you play this card. Turn 1, you play like Terraformers Globe. Turn
okay.
2, you drop this. Turn 3, you O-ring their threat and you're like, oh man, it's attacking as a 3/2 flyer. And then your opponent has like, is like, okay, cool, I'm just gonna play like Plasma Addict, and you're like, wait, that's just, I put in all that work to get this into be a 3/2 flyer, and you just have a 3/3 flying haste for the same cost and no like whatever, and I'm like, oh no. And it's,
Yeah, I think, yeah. I was just gonna say, I think this card really puts into perspective just how messed up of a card Plasma Addict is. Um, because I had the exact same thought process. I was like, actually swinging as a 3/2. Wait, that's not actually that good compared to Plasma Addict. Um, I do want to say maybe if you're playing this like weird civilized aggro deck where you're curving like, you know, founding hero into this, you've bounced a land to play Rail Line, and on turn 3 you play some relatively cheap enchantment.
cough,
Um,
Theocracy, cough.
yep, that
Yeah.
sounds awesome.
I mean, that
Um,
sounds great.
and now, or you don't play the Rail Line, but you Theocracy into a Tidehall Lich. This alongside Founding Hero, I think makes both them look much stronger.
Hmm.
Like if you're not warping your deck construction to enable it for just one of them, if you're change your deck construction to enable both of them, I get much higher on it. I do think at the end of the day, this is a card that it's an aggressive card, but it also asks to be able to attack multiple times to really, pop off. And I think that's kind of a big ask, but also the payoff's there, so I think it's fine. I also
It is
think that
true that this
Mhm.
scales up pretty nicely in a world without removal, which sometimes, some matchups there just isn't much removal flying around.
Mhm.
If those matchups continue to exist, I'm gonna personally kneecap every single of those players in MSEM.
What are you talking about? Like literally, there are so many decks that don't run very much removal. Like Shops doesn't run very much removal. Wonderfall doesn't run very much removal. Like I just think
I think
the
the thing
problem
is
is that
I think the
cards
thing is
take
like
a long time to
Wanderfall is gonna
develop.
outlinear you if you're playing this. I think, and then Shops is just this could maybe do some work against Shops. We also saw Shops defeat a much better aggro deck. So
The, so I'm gonna actually agree with you, Dodger, though, in that I think this card has the potential to do a very specific thing, which is flying creatures have if you're already wanting to play equipment or artifacts in general, I would like to introduce you to a card called Staff of Equilibrium. And if you curve one drop, do literally anything into turn 2 Disciple, into turn 3 Staff of Equilibrium, congrats, you actually can beat a large number of decks without doing anything else. And notably, that's when this card is a Welkin turn. We have some really messed up equipment in this format, and this card literally just being a 2/1 flyer that can carry equipment well makes me willing to play it if I was ever interested in playing one of those decks.
Oh yeah, equipment on this is. Ooh.
Yeah, I think the fact that this is essentially in the right deck. It becomes a answer me or die.
Yep.
Which like there's value in that kind of thing. Even if those cards are vulnerable to removal, your opponent's not always going to have the removal spell. And again, it's more about like the deck building opportunity cost. How much are you lowering your overall card quality in order to enable this? I
Yep.
think is the general question when it comes to civilized. And my personal opinion is that I think there are shells where you don't have to limit your card quality very much.
I guess I'm just still sus of this in a plasmatic world, but I think that's more of an indictment of plasmatic than it is this.
Yeah.
That's probably true. Yeah. All right. I can take the next one.
Yeah, sell us on this one.
All right. So Primordial Manifestation is a 1 mana 0/3 blue creature. It has the Water Shaper effect, so you can pay a blue mana to give it +1/-1 until end of turn. And then it also has Curiosity, so whenever it hits somebody with combat damage, you draw a card. So I think like obviously when you first look at this, like a 1 mana creature that has Curiosity innately is very very strong. But the catch is that you have to pay a blue mana whenever you hit them to get that effect, right? Um, I think where this shines is in decks that can maybe just put a buff on this and just be like, okay, I'm done. Like I don't want to have to pay into this anymore. Um, Especially if you can still have the ability to give it the Water Shaper bonus, meaning that like it's pretty strong in combat. You can potentially have it deal a bunch of damage to your opponent if you have mana to burn. I think this is like a card that's very very good on turn one and a bit weaker after that, I would say.
Yeah, I definitely agree with your assessment. I hadn't considered playing this with things that could actually give it a power, but that makes me drastically higher on this card. I think this card is kind of weaker than By the Sea otherwise, because it costs you a similar amount. Like the first draw costs you the same amount of mana, and every draw after that costs you more. Um, but I think the fact that this can block easier is kind of nice. It has less synergies, but maybe that changes if we get another set with Elemental Tribal. I don't know. I think everyone that I've talked to is way higher on this card than me, which usually means everyone else is wrong or I'm wrong. So cue Principal Skinner memes.
Um,
Well, I
I
mean,
my take on this is that from the experience I have with it in other formats is I think it's a little overhyped because
mm,
like having to put 1 mana into this and losing because I think like the deck like this you want to be uh, being efficient with your mana and like curving out or like you want to go this into like maybe like turn two hopefully hold up some interaction or hold or like put down another threat and like losing 1 mana each turn to have to turn this on is just such a burden. It's so
So
bad.
the card that I put uh, into a deck with this was Unbeholden Navigator from Alara, which is a 1 mana 1/1 with Encourage, and then if you encourage a creature, it gains Curiosity for that turn. So those two cards synergize very, very well because Unbeholden Navigator gives it the buff without you having to spend any mana, and then if you hit them, you get to draw 2 cards.
But then I think that the thing is, at that point, if they have something that can block a 1/2, you're just like, well. And the earliest you can do that is
well,
what, turn
it's not
3?
a 1/2, it's a 1/4 that can potentially become a 2/3, a 3/2, or a 4/1.
Wait, how does it become a 1/4? Because it gets.
If you get a +1/+1
Oh,
with
okay,
the
yeah.
Navigator,
Okay.
then yeah.
But then they can still just like. I feel like it's. I feel
They
like
can outbody it. Like, well, you don't want to outbody it when they have a thing that can utilize that flyer so effectively. But I do agree that if you're putting a bunch of effort into your one drop and it's not paying dividends until turn 3, you're setting yourself up for some disappointment. I'm not going to say that it's like it's hashtag unplayable. But I think this is a card that requires you jump through a hoop, and the payoff is good, but it's not insane. Especially because I think we already have curiosity in the format, don't we?
Well, yeah, but like this is a creature with curiosity innately attached to it, which I think is very, very different. I also don't think this card is an all-star at all.
Mhm.
I think right now there isn't a lot of support to maybe pull this off, but I think that there are synergies that are worth looking at with this card. And uh like there are definitely decks you can make with this card is competitive, maybe just not enough of the time. And I do think that if you drop this any time later than turn 1, it's not very good.
Yeah.
So those are all knocks against the card. I just wanted to highlight that I think there are ways you can make this a pretty powerful inclusion in your deck.
All right, so our next card is Rudai Overseer. Um, so this reminds me of an old joke about Disciple of Bolas, where people have photoshopped it. So the ETB is when it enters the battlefield, rearrange the bottom 3 cards of your library. Um,
Wait,
because
do you mean Augur of Bolas?
oh yeah, Hawker Bolas, not Disciple. I always get those two confused. Um, that joke would have worked better if I'd said the right card name. Anyway, the fact that this is top 4 and it can well, I guess Augur can hit both instants or sorceries. This hitting artifacts or enchantments and looking at top 4 helps quite a bit. The
Mhm.
main issue is you need to be running 16 artifacts or enchantments to get this up to a 72% hit rate. And if I'm being honest, my 2 mana 1/3 having a over 25% chance to just not do anything, especially when some number of those artifact hits are just like rail lines realistically, kind of skeeves me out. It's possible that this is better in a deck like, Blues Eclipses, Blue White Robots, but that deck's more aggro skewed, so you need to find some more mid rangey build.
What do you
Um,
think about
Augur
this in a
Bolas.
sorry.
Oh, sorry. You say your thing.
I was gonna, what do you think about this in a Theocracy shell?
I think that's a
Because
little value-y, but like also, if you're doing like the Shawlbinder stuff and you're in blue already, maybe that gets there.
and this can find you another Theocracy as well. So
Yeah,
you can
I mean,
Theocracy into another Theocracy and just go off. But
Yeah,
yeah,
I'm,
but
I'm
you
kind
need
of reminded
to.
of the thing that you said at the end of last time, where it's like I think it could be competitive, but maybe like not that competitive, and I think that's kind of how I feel about this card.
well, I think this card is not the kind of card you build a deck around, but I think that this is a pretty important value piece, especially if you are running a deck that's just incidentally running a lot of artifacts and or enchantments, and you're a defensive shell. This is a great blocker for you to include in case the format is pretty aggro heavy, because this blocks Banish Companions well and can cantrip and help filter for finding your flesh to rot if you're playing Legend Weaving or whatever other stuff
Yeah,
you're considering.
like I think Glint Nest Crane is a really good comparison point because I
Mhm.
forgot that card existed. This
Yeah.
trades flying for being able to hit enchantments. That's, I think, generally an upgrade. Like, yes, it's
Yeah.
worse at carrying a sword, but like, your guy carrying a sword probably wasn't going to go the distance anyway. This entering the format at the same time as Lara, which brings a bunch of highly playable artifact creatures, is a game changer.
Yeah.
Um, I'm not low on this card. I think this card is a solid card to keep in mind, and it'll be a good bit player. But I don't think this is worth warping your deck around, and I think you really need to make sure you have a large density of artifacts and enchantments before you want to touch this.
Yeah, definitely agree. I think this is a very solid role player, but it's not a build around.
Okay, so moving on to our first black card, and boy is he a doozy.
Jesus Christ.
Oh man, it's your boy Eli Windsor's Lone Gun, and man, I would like to tell you a tale of a time that this was 2B, and did it have like 5 starting loyalty? Was that
It
it?
had 4 starting loyalty, its -2 was a -1, and the bullet entered untapped. And
Okay.
What?
for some reason, I saw the card in the Urshad spoiler shortly after Urshad got added to the format, and I was talking with Simon on I was like on a bus. I told Simon, this card is broken. He was like, yeah, it seems pretty good. And I was like, no, you don't get it. This is actually broken. And then unfortunately, real life happened, and I wasn't able to play Custard during that rotation. But from what it sounds like,
Oh no, yeah,
uh,
it was very broken, and I'm very
it was the game in town. There was no other game in town.
yeah, I'm very. I mean, there. The thing is, mono red at that time was also completely insane. So it was kind of just like, are you playing an Eli deck, or are you playing mono red, or are you playing something not competitive? Um, but yeah, now Eli is much more balanced, and unfortunately, I think people have already made the Mapumo comparison. Makes him a hard sell. That's my mic. Makes him a hard
So
sell next to those.
I think even compared to Mapumo, like don't play this in a deck where you have both white black. No disagreement there. The thing is, not every deck has white black, and I think in like a bug deck, Eli Windsor is the real deal. Creating artifacts is some neat little synergy stuff. Unlike Mapumo, the fact you can bank the bullets and thus
Mhm.
kill a bigger creature, or you can draw a bunch of cards once you get the emblem, is huge. But on the other hand, like Eli, this is a much higher power level format than the standard that Eli ripped to shreds, and this is a much weaker version of Eli. Um, I recently was able to beat an Eli that had stuck on the board for multiple turns while I was on a creature-based deck, Podlight versus a bug control deck that used Eli, and that was the moment where I realized, okay, this card isn't actually going to terrorize the format because I, on paper, should be a deck that is very vulnerable to this, and I'm just not. But Eli is still a good card. You should still have him on your radar. He's a 3-drop planeswalker. Those are always powerful. Well, not always powerful. When they have removal on a plus, those tend to be kind of nuts. Um,
I
but
like
One thing
this
I
a
wanted
lot
to. Oh,
for Sights Beyond decks. Actually,
I'm super high on this in Sights Beyond. This is insane there.
yeah,
yeah, because
Um,
it's 2 out of 3 pieces for Concord.
yeah, and
yeah,
it's
and you
also
have a
just like
land.
a good
So
card.
wait, Sights Beyond. You're at when you play Sights Beyond. If you have an Eli, you're there.
Hmm.
So
Yeah,
that's
Yeah,
nice.
yeah. One thing
it's basically an
though
extra.
is regarding Mapumo. I think you mentioned like if you're not in white black, but then you also mentioned earlier like you could like the format's mana bases are good enough, and especially like we're getting like fun new tools that add to that. Some of them in this set, some of them in Alara. That I think that like you can reasonably make like even 4 color decks or 5 color decks if you really want to stretch it. Obviously, like if you want to play it safe, you can include Eli, but I think the mana bases are relatively free enough that you could just like, okay, I'm going to splash white from a Pumo and not like and not like feel bad about it.
Awkwardly, it's also going to usually be less harsh on your mana base to splash white from a Pumo than hitting double black for Eli.
Yeah.
Just because of how mana math works out. Like white black is easier to cast than black black if you have white black duels and a fetch land. Um, the other strike against Eli is he's very one dimensional. He does one thing, and he does it pretty well, which is kill creatures, and sometimes planeswalkers. But the fact that Mapumo threatens to nuke 3 of your opponent's lands, which, let's be real, that's all Mapuma's ult ever does, makes it a much more real card versus control decks. Whereas this, it does the thing where like you bank up, 4 bullets, and then you get to draw 4 cards if they'd never had an answer to Eli. Um, where Mapumo ults slightly faster, and has a slightly higher impact ult. I don't know. I think Eli is still definitely a solid tech choice. But I don't think this like an instant staple.
Yeah, I
Can
would
I
agree
just
with
ask,
that assessment.
why is there a cowboy on this plane?
He's a
I know.
planeswalker.
Yeah, I know he's a
Let
planeswalker, but what is the lore behind this guy?
Well,
So,
so he
so
he's
from
from
my
another plane,
understanding,
and
Eli is basically very emo because his GF or wife, I don't remember which one, Marianne, died tragically. He's kind of just on the road, lone cowboy kind of guy, and he kind of like comes to his world. And it's like, you know what? Maybe life is worth living, and
so
then he kills a god.
if you look at the flavor text for Imperial Achievement, Eli actually has a quote where he says, "I don't know what Marianne thought was so special about this place, but now I think I might start to get it." So
so wait.
he's actually on Urshad because Marianne probably had some kind of affiliation or affection for the planet of
That's
Urshad.
That's fascinating. So that means Marianne might also be a planeswalker?
I feel like Marianne would have to be a planeswalker in that case.
Yeah, that's the only thing that really makes sense, unless
Yeah.
something went really wild.
Unless there's some
But
kind of like weird Ren and 6 nonsense with Eli and Marianne, but that's
I do not think there is.
the other thing I would note in terms of Eli flavor and why is there a cowboy on this plane is when you look at it, Eli's kind of serving the same role as Gideon did on Amonkhet, where it's, looking at this plane and seeing all the cool stuff that it has to offer from an outsider's eyes, in the same way that like Renewed Faith works, and then you see all the brutality that it took to build
Mhm.
this empire. You're like,
Or
wow, this
like
sucks.
kind of like Tamio on Innistrad too.
Yeah. Uh,
Kind of.
it's kind of a way to introduce the audience to the highs and lows of this place through an outsider's eyes, and then
Mhm.
also gives you a convenient excuse to, oh look, that downtick allows you to exile gods. Let's have him kill a god.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I also think it's because like I think a little bit of it is also like there's the character of Ace Holden, who was a legendary creature on Lorado, and I think there isn't like kind of just like these cool suave but like emo cowboy is just I think a kind of a fun character to just play around with, and so they were like, what if that but Planeswalker? And I think, yeah, Eli obviously has different dimensions, but I think that like you can draw parallels there.
He contains multitudes.
Okay, so moving on to our next card, which also, in a way, I suppose, contains multitudes. Um, Harbinger of Locusts. Um, it's 1 and a black for a 2/1 with flying. It has one of the set's mechanics, Assault, for 2 and a black. And whenever it assaults, you can search your library for an insect card and put it into your hand. So this is actually pretty reasonably powerful. I thought that this was I always misread this as costing 3 mana on its face, and then I'm like less high on it, and then I read it and I'm like, oh no, actually that's because 2/1 flying is a reasonable body. You can assault it and then like find another copy of itself, or you can have like a toolbox. 'Cause we have like reasonable aggressive insects. Umbredu Goliath is the first one that comes to mind, but yeah.
Yeah, so this card, I would make the comparison to, I already forget the name, Growth Chamber Guardian. There we go. So Growth Chamber Guardian from Ravnica.
Fields of Ravnica. It was
No, it's from
good.
Ravnica Allegiance because it was the Simic one, right?
Oh.
Yeah.
I thought it was before the format went to shit though.
I believe Growth Chamber Guardian was from Ravnica Allegiance. You can
Ravnica
you can
Allegiance was the
that.
second.
Okay. Yeah. So anyway, Growth Chamber Guardian was a 2 mana 2/2, and you could pay 3 to make it a 4/4 and get another Growth Chamber Guardian. This has the downside of only getting +1/+1 and having to do it when you attack as a sorcery, essentially. But the upside is that it flies and that you can not only search for another copy of itself, you can search for any insect. And as Caillou said, we have actually quite a few pretty solid insects in the format. The ones that I mentioned off the top of my head, Umbredu Goliath is obviously the biggest one, but there's also stuff like Untethered Disciple, and crap, there's one more that I was thinking of, but I forgot.
There's probably a
Foraging
decent
beetle?
amount of like black green insects from COD.
Chittering Chaurus is another pretty good one.
Yeah, but
So I think that you can even get greedy insects if you want like some kind of silver bullets type thing to search up with this.
So, and I cannot believe for the life of me I'm about to say this. I think this is just like worse saddled scuttleback.
this is blasphemy. Anyways, so I'm gonna kick Pip out of the group now.
So here's the thing. So the fail case to me on this card is you curve 2 mana into 3 mana and they Exeunt. And yes, you replace your card, but you've sacrificed your second and third turns of the game to, get this kind of conditional 2-for-1. Whereas Saddled Scuttleback, you always get the card for exactly the mana you pay, i.e. 3 mana. And the fail case of getting a land, I think, is actually, especially a land that can be any dual, is I think generally better than the fail case of getting another copy of this. Like, I think it's possible that the toolbox is better than I'm expecting, but 5 mana, even split across 2 turns, is a crazy amount of mana for a card that you also have to be getting into the red zone with.
Yeah.
So, if you're keeping it on the defensive, you're not doing it. If you're holding up mana to interact, you're not doing it. You have to be pushing with this card to get the value off.
It's just
Yeah,
like,
I think
what
I
else
would
you could do?
that
Just
with
play Gathering the Game. Like, if this is the kind of thing you're looking for, just Gathering the Game.
Well, I think Gathering the Gang requiring external synergy. Like, again, I'm very high on cards with internal synergies. And I think I agree with Dodger in that this card does resemble Growth Chamber Guardian. I think the fact that you could hold up mana for Growth Chamber Guardian was a huge part of why that card was powerful.
That is true. Yeah.
And I also think the fact that the second that format started to get more powerful, like with the introduction of the next set, Growth Chamber Garden basically fell off the map. It couldn't handle, like, fighting with the big kids. And I think that's going to be a similar story with Harbinger of Locusts. This is a card that I don't know how good it was in standard, but if MMCM was a little smaller, or if this was in the set roulette or something like that, I think this card would be incredibly real. I think this card is just a little too clunky for this format. And I think Scuttleback is the fact that Scuttleback is 3 mana, it always tutors the card, and it's a 3/1 on the ground without any extra effort, kind of just makes it better. And again, I cannot believe for the life of me I'm defending Saddled Scuttleback.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment. I think it takes a pretty specific deck to want this card in the first place. Like, you have to be wanting a 2 mana 2/1 flyer, which, while not horrible, it's not really what you want in a format like MSEM. So I'm willing to buy that. I don't think this card is quite there right now, but if you are an Emberdew Goliath deck and you are looking for a good 2-drop that can potentially help you, operate with like very few resources, I think that this card is potentially worth looking at.
All right. So the next card is one I'm super hyped about. Because it's kind of sights beyond, but not color restricted. Well, different color restricted.
Yeah.
Next up, we have Imperial Confidant, who's 1 in a black, 2/1, civilized. If you're civilized, you draw a card and lose 1 life. This card is not hard to turn on. It's actually really easy. You go Globe into Zealot. You go the Vivid Land that's an enchantment for some reason into bouncing your second land for a rail line. You also don't need this on 2. Like, if you just think you're going to reliably have this come the mid game, I think this card is still a good include. Bob is a powerful card. The fact that MSEM doesn't have one is just kind of a weird coincidence, especially because,
I mean,
to
we
my
we
knowledge,
have various riffs on it. We have Masahita, who's a Rob. It's just that like
we
we
don't
don't
have
have one
any
that's
like good.
universally playable ones.
Yeah, like we don't have one especially that slots into that kind of grindy mid-range 2-for-1 U deck in the same way that I think Imperial Confidant really does, especially
Yeah.
with something like Ostracizer's Orb. Like, I think this card is probably one of
So
my picks for
I
like
I
1 to 10
actually
best in this format.
Yeah. Also, one thing I really like is you're able to maintain like they don't know what it is you got off of it, so you do have a bit of hidden information there. Whereas with Bob, it's just out in the open as if you're like flooding or whatever.
Yeah, I actually at the last minute cut this for my Mardu Civilized deck, which I think
Whoa.
I know. Yeah. Well, I was kind of operating with the flawed assumption that I wanted every card to contribute.
Mhm.
And I think that this is definitely something that is worth. Uh, so like when I was playing the deck, I think it became pretty clear that I was very very good at achieving civilized, but I didn't have enough payoffs. Um, and I found that I was running out of cards once I played out my hand. So um, both of those conclusions make me think, okay, well, Imperial Confidant should probably be in the deck. And so in take 2, Imperial Confidant will definitely. And that's all I really have to say. It's a very good card. I should not have cut it.
Um so moving on to the next card, which I've gone back and forth on this card so many goddamn times, um, is Initiative Desert Healer, who's going to be our Black God. So when Initiative enters the battlefield or attacks, you surveil one. At the beginning of your upkeep, if you have 7 or more cards in your graveyard, you can transform him. And he flips from being a 2/3 into a 4/5 indestructible with 2 and a black, exile 2 cards in your graveyard, each opponent loses 2 life and you gain 2 life. So this is weird, but I think this is MSEM's best Goif.
I think this card's sick. I don't think this card's
Absolutely, like you can easily flip this by like turn 4, I'd say.
You can technically flip it on turn.
You can flip it on turn 3 with
You need
turn
Oracle's
1
Vision.
Oracle's Vision. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's the card you need. But Like
Yeah,
Oracle
oh yeah,
Vision would be fine.
fetch plus
So
Oracle's Vision.
Plus
Yeah.
another fetch into CTV. But also just the 2/3 that's surveilling one on ETB and attack is not powerful. But I mean it looks kind of similar to Grimflayer, and it's easier to cast, and it has a way higher upside.
yeah, I think this card is
And that 3
absolutely nuts.
toughness too. Like that 3 toughness.
Yeah, which makes
I've
it
actually
like
been
on
really
par with
looking
like
at.
Warfield and Sporeflow on drop.
It also can block and eat most aggro creatures. Like
Can you imagine getting something like this off Theocracy? Like that is
yeah, that's kind of messed up.
that's just ridiculous. I don't know. I think that yeah. I mean, when you just think of this as a goif, like it pretty much is. Um, and I think people always underestimate how easy it is to fill graveyards. Um, especially with the tools that we have in this format. It's really really easy.
I'm kind of terrified of when, if at some point in the future, Monsters of Chikyu gets into the format and we get like the creature that transforms, Wandering Gnat, I think it is, that transforms into a 4/3 flyer with protection
Yeah.
from dragons.
Yeah.
That plus this, I think, is just like such a good
That's
threat suite.
that's a good blue-black Delver deck. There's also Bitter Duckling in Cloudscape, so
Hey,
if either of those gets in, I think blue-black Delver becomes instantly a playable deck. Um,
yeah.
with just cheap disruption, cheap threats that can just really snowball out of control if they get to flip, and like just a decent, just all the best interaction the format has to offer.
And like even now, even without those, like I think it's probably still like a reasonable tech. Like what you jam stuff in the 3-drop slot instead, like Unearthed Legion or Performer of Ambition, but like sure.
Yeah, so I'm currently running this in my black white unearth deck, I believe. Um, and I think the two drops I'm using are Dew and Deadwood Terror. And then the deck runs Performer of Ambition, Bloodjade Prophet, and removal spells, and unearth effects. And I think but like that's kind of going all in on Initiative. But you I think the point of this card is that you don't have to go all in. Like you can just play this in a regular deck that has fetch lands, cheap spells, and ways to get him to attack, and like he's going to win you the game if he doesn't get removed. So I
Yeah,
think
it also does kind of the Hazoret thing where it also provides you this reach where you can just convert cards in graveyard into burn. So,
yeah.
3 mana for 2 damage, not a good rate. But if you're just looking to close the game out just a little bit faster, you get it.
And the
And
life is
also like
also
you
relevant
gain
if
life,
you're face
so
Yeah, gaining life is also semi-relevant.
yeah. Okay, so Inishu good. Next card.
Initiative very good.
Next one's Nameless Throne, right?
Yes, which I realize I misread this card when I okayed it, so let's go to it.
Yeah. So I think I'm kind of with Pip. I don't think this card is very good, but I'll read it. Nameless Throng is a 2 mana 3/2. Can't block. You can pay 2 mana and exile an artifact or enchantment from your graveyard to return Nameless Throng to the battlefield from your graveyard. I think that the reason why I don't like this card is there are so many really good black aggro creatures in this format with like recursive abilities, and several of them have been nerfed already, and they're probably still better than this card. And they don't even really require you to build your deck in any way. Like this card requires you to have
Yeah,
artifacts
I
and
think we
enchantments
can
in
like
your graveyard.
wax eloquent about how this card is bad. I just kind of want to know how Pip misread it and then move on. Just because
Yeah, fair.
I think we're an hour and a
I
half in, and
thought
I want to keep us moving along.
Yeah.
I thought it was Scrap Heap Scrounger. I thought it could exile creatures. I was like, this
Ah,
card, this card can exile basically anything. You can just slap into a random creature list. Yes, it isn't as good as our 1-drop ones, but hey, it's still better than Shikai Revenant. But
Which like
that's not the world
yeah,
we live in.
which like
So
that's a
let's
fair
move on.
misread given that like you see artifact, you see enchantment, you're like, oh, civilized. It's just pseudo civilized. Okay, so next
all
up,
right.
a card that I
Reject
think
modernity.
made waves in its standard tenure, but will it have the same chance here? And that's Tradition. 2 black and a black for a discovery. The first 2 modes are pretty unassuming. You mill 2, you gain 2, whatever. The third mode, though, is the part that we're really here for, which is during each of your turns, you may cast a permanent spell from your graveyard. The problem is it is slow to get there, and
Yeah, it's 3 turns, so like assuming no ramp, you get it by turn 6.
So,
And like with ramp, you get it maybe turn 5.
okay, so here's the thing. The appealing thing to me about this card is the fact it fuels itself, it gives you a small life buffer. It's a 4-drop enchantment, so it dodges Pith Bolt, even though it does bite it fairly badly to Journey's End. And just the ceiling on this card is you win control in mid-range mirrors. This is a must-answer threat, and it's harder to answer than Villainy. And the main issue that I'm currently having started to look into it with some instigator searches, is there's less good recursion targets than you'd want. Like you don't during its custard tenure, you could do things like lock people out on draw steps with a sack outlet and an artifact that made people discard a card when it left the battlefield. But this format doesn't like have
I mean,
Pyrite
to be fair,
Spellbomb.
that was like that wasn't really the thing that
Oh,
really
that
put it
wasn't
over.
the deck.
Yeah,
That wasn't the tradition deck.
yeah,
Huh.
the main thing was a white black tradition in which you would just be like, okay, I'm gonna like play this and border makers, and then if you have creatures, I'll just keep throwing border makers in front of them and just keep draining you. And it's
Yeah.
like, and if you don't have creatures, well, okay, I'll just run this border makers at your face. So like, what are you gonna do?
Okay, yeah, we're getting to border makers later. That
The thing that excites me about tradition is it looks like a balanced version of Chigao. And I think Chigao was an insanely underplayed card when it was legal, and it's banned for a very good reason. Um, I think this card, if your deck is built correctly and you have it enabled, it should be very difficult to lose. And it does help you get to that point, even if it's not substantially.
Yeah,
Um,
I think the life gain is what makes me feel like this card could get there.
I think it
Yes, it's
involves
pretty slow.
planeswalkers, actually. I think it involves like
Hmm.
Lucian suicide downticking or Calum suicide downticking, and then you just replay them.
Oh yeah, that's a really great way to do it
Yeah,
too.
do we have any good cards that like can immediately alt? I don't know.
I mean, Calum's has a -3 and 3 starting loyalty,
I think Calum is probably the best way to like
especially because you
the best
can.
energy to use with tradition.
Ooh, and then also when you uptick Calum, you can play the permanent card you discarded, so you can
Oh
bring
yeah.
Yeah,
symmetry
that's a
there
good
as
point.
well.
And yeah, so tradition it used to mill 3 and gain 3, and I think that in that mode it was
Oh,
definitely a lot better.
that is actually a lot better. I think. I feel like if this gains any more than 2 life, you're gaining enough of a buffer that I feel like it should be pretty easy to get to the discovery. Especially if you're running like other ways of protecting yourself. But I would very much like to see this in some sort of like Zan list. Maybe run this as a 2 of in like Simon's Chile deck or something like that. I don't know.
I think Simon's Chile deck doesn't want this. I think the appeal of this card is in a deck that goes way bigger than Simon's deck.
Yeah, it's a
Okay.
little bit. Simon's deck is more low to the ground. It feels like.
Yeah, I could buy that.
Okay, and we ended off black with a bang. And let's start off red in a similar fashion by blowing something up. It's Burning Sulfur. So 1 in a red for you destroy a land an opponent controls. They can search our land for a basic land card, put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle down a library, and then you draw a card. So it's basically a strictly worse, I guess yeah, strictly worse version of that new card we got from Zendikar Rising.
Yep.
I think in general I think the draw card is what makes this appealing because we do have like a Ponza deck making the rounds right now. Um, but I think this is like even with the
as
draw card, do you play this over Sanding and Imperial Siege or like because I think
You shouldn't.
and I you should.
probably Sanding.
You shouldn't,
because
I said.
Oh, you shouldn't.
I think
Okay,
this
that was
is
my
100%
inclination is
worse.
that you shouldn't either. So
So this is 100% worse than Imperial Siege in any deck.
Oh, absolutely.
It's also worse than standing in Ponza because most decks run basics because the Wayfarer's Shrine is good and the dual
The duels
lands
need
need
basics.
basics to function. So they're almost always going to have something to search. Even like the 4-color amalgamations that Gateways always runs usually run like 5 basics. So really all this does is it either will snipe their monument or if you're lucky, or you'll spend 2 mana and cantrip, and you'll slightly inconvenience your opponent's dual land. And most of the time, that's not worth 2 mana to me. I think that standing is much better because giving them a colorless land will actually like have the potential to mana screw them sometimes. And if you're Ponza, you don't care about drawing extra cards; you just want to mana screw them. So yeah, I'm not high on this card. In MSEM, think we have better options.
I will say, if we do see an uptick in like chops or that mono instant type list, like decks that
Don't run basics.
decks that are just go full greedy.
That's true. If shops is being spammed, you might consider it.
But also, like, shops being spammed, like, there's nothing that stops you from. There's nothing stopping shops players other than just pure greed from running some number of basics.
That's true. Yeah.
Like,
But
shops mana
MSM
bases
players
are
are so
not.
greedy, though. Like, let's be honest here.
Shops
Y'all are
mana
greedy.
bases are not optimized correctly right now. And I think the fact that this has a fail case to it, your opponent gets land. Not even to say, like, the nightmare scenario here, as unlikely as this is your opponent has like 3 lands or whatever, and you go to Burning Sulfur it, and they float mana off it. The land comes in untapped. They can now instant speed a 4-drop. They can cast Bant Command.
Yeah, fair.
Oh,
Yeah,
bad.
that's pretty bad. I agree.
So yeah, so Burning Sulfur bad. I think we can move on.
Yeah,
Anyways,
I would just move on.
Let's
This
move
card's
on
not
to a
good.
2-drop that is actually not bad. Currency.
I think Currency's sick. I guess you
Currency's-
guys talk about the card.
Or wait, is
Currency's
it
cool.
2 mana in MSEM?
Yep,
Yeah.
2 mana in MSEM.
Okay, cool. I think it was nerfed to 3 mana in its standard tenure. So I'm glad we have the original version because the original version is insane and I love it.
So, I mean, here's the thing. I think this card's insane in the context of its standard format. The main thing that makes me a little bit low on this card is Lotus Studies has done jack shit. And in this format, Lotus Studies is create 2 treasure tokens when you cast it.
Mhm.
I think the fact that this allows you to turn those treasure tokens into clues if it, gets through another turn is nice. I don't think it's the be-all end-all, but it does definitely give this card an edge. The main issue I have is Lotus Studies being in sorcery, I think is more of a relevant upside. I don't
I
really
actually
want
don't
this.
agree.
Maybe in Concord, but I don't
Yeah.
think
Okay.
there's any
So
other
my main
Concord or
thing is that I think
civilized
that
decks
evaluating
that I want
this
this in.
next to Lotus Studies is actually I feel like it is a mistake because I think the role that they are filling are 2 very different ones. I think if you're playing Lotus Studies, you are using it unfairly. You are trying to, or like in my opinion, I think you are trying to storm off with it, and in that case, it being a sorcery is much better. It immediately refunding itself is also much better. I think that with currency, you're trying to play a deck that is that cares about having both an artifact and enchantment. Maybe it's Concord, maybe it's civilized, it's some number of what I'm about to list. You care about it, and you're in a deck that wants mana acceleration in some form or can utilize that well, but also wants to play a grindy game if that like doesn't happen. I think like something like Concord is actually like a decent representation of what that might look like. Oh, but I think there's potential for other like aggressively oriented mid-range decks that could want currency is my opinion.
I think being able to stack stuff like your Tide Hollow Lich tokens or Tide Hollow Lich itself can give you a lot of staying power in the long run potentially. And I just think for the purposes of building decks that want Conquered Civilized, like the fact that this gives you an enchantment and an artifact is also really relevant. It just does that in a neat little package. I built. I don't know if you guys saw this when I built a currency deck in my 20 brews thing. It is a blue-red treasure deck that ramps up to Fateful Eruption, and also runs Dragon Gate. And I think that currency is kind of a house in that list as well. So I think there's just a lot of like neat little things you can do with it. But I don't think I think if you're just like, oh, I have my mid-range deck, so I want currency, the answer is probably no.
I think the one other thing that I'm low on this aspect of this card, but I think it's something to be acknowledged. You can make a draw engine out of that last ability. We have a non-zero number of cards that make like random useless artifacts, things like idols or whatever, this being able to turn those into actual cards is kind of a big deal.
Yeah. Def agree. Cool. Let's move on.
Yeah, sounds like a plan.
All right.
And I think it's our third god of the day. You want to take it away?
Sure. So Emirabi and Sunula. It's a 4-mana 5/4. At the beginning of your turn, you get to make a 1/1 with haste, and then at the beginning of your upkeep, if you control 5 more creatures, you can draw into a 6/5 indestructible. And then it has an ability that triggers either at the beginning of your upkeep or when you transform it. You get to temporarily steal a permanent with converted mana cost X or less, where X is the number of creatures you control. And you do the whole untap, gains haste, yada yada. I am not super high on this. I'm not sure why. I think like dropping this on turn 4 and making a 1/1 is like decent value.
No,
I
it's
just
not.
feel like, well, it's a 5/4, and like, you know, a 4-mana 5/4 is not a horrible body, but I'm unconvinced on.
It just dies.
You
Like
can't flip it. Like 5 or more creatures is you've won range in this format. If you are
Yeah,
playing a
yeah.
4-drop with like the expectation that you'll have 5 or more creatures, literally just play like, I don't know, any of our 2 or 3 mana like mass anthems and just kill someone. The reason why tokens decks died in this format is because people realized, wait, we have playable sweepers. And then they just played sweepers and tokens decks could not keep up.
and
This card solves none
you
of the
killed the
problems.
mana base for the one good one.
Yeah, and this card solves none of the problems that those decks have. And I mean, it's also like, you know, if you have this as a threat on its own, they have a window to kill it before it makes a token. Like if you play this and say move to combat, they say in response exeunt. I don't think you ever want to play Magic again. Like that, spending 4 mana to lose to a 1-mana removal spell or out of body experience or anything like that just puts you so far away, especially if you're an aggro deck that's trying to leverage being slightly more efficient than other people.
Okay. So I think there are two good things about this card. And the first one is look at how gay it is. Very great. Always love to see
Strong
more.
upside, strong upside.
Yeah, always love to see more of that gay shit. The second thing is it's featured in my latest MSEDH video, which you should definitely go check out. MSEDH Game Night.
Hashtag always be shilling.
Hashtag always be shilling. But yeah, to get back to the actual card, I think it's just even with the like, does anyone else Pithwilt? I think that like even then it's just not worth it.
I mean, it doesn't. Oh, never mind. Okay.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
was making
Yeah, I get it. Yeah. I was saying that I don't think it's very good, so I agree with you. I don't think I have anything else to say about it.
So, Kanon War Driver is 1 red for a 2/1. You know what? Honestly, off to a good start. It also has tap. It deals 1 damage to target creature you control. That creature gains haste until end of turn. This card's weird.
It is
It
very
enables
weird.
a lot of little synergies that I think are kind of cool. Descend Through the Highlands had a mechanic called Endure, which is you put X plus and plus 1 counters on a creature when it takes damage, and
Isn't
then a
there a
bunch of them.
Persevere in this format?
There's also Persevere in this format, a couple
None,
sets
none,
with it actually.
none of the Persevere cards are good though, right?
I think there's like 1 or 2 of them that are good, but
There's
the
like the
awkward thing is
blue-white one.
enabling them. Yeah.
Yeah.
Then it granting haste is also not irrelevant. Like you can curve some pretty powerful things this way. Like there are aggro creatures that are held back largely because they don't have haste. And again, the fail case on this is 1 red for a 2/1. So I think this is a weird case of additive distraction where if I just stare at the ability, I think, okay, this card is too cute. This card is just trying to enable some stupid Dodger-like synergies, and it's going to be a 1-mana 0/1, and it's going to be unplayable. But no, this is a 1-mana 2/1. Like, the fail case is Savannah Lions in red. Go just kill them. This card's actually good, and I kind of hate that.
Yeah, I like this card quite a bit actually. I think that it again, like, the not very low. I think there are unfortunately aren't really very many cards in the format that like actively want this. Like if I'm able to play this in like my standard dinosaurs deck, for instance, and I play my Riftjaw Raptor, give it haste and draw a card, like that's insane, right?
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
so I think if MSEM gets a set with Enrage, this card in some playable and rage creatures, this card stock goes up quite a bit. But also, if you're playing like a mid-range aggro deck, whatever, being able to drop like I don't know your Mossy Companion and just give it haste immediately with your 1-drop, like that's really nice, honestly. So yeah, I'm pretty high on this card too.
You can also do some like kind of wacky things with Grape Pelt Emissary, for instance, which is whenever Hound you control is dealt damage, it deals 1 damage to any, this card deals 1 damage to any target. So you can use it to both haste Grape Pelt Emissary and also ping things that you don't control. You can ping Barricade Watch to start growing it. You can ping Infernal Barrier to go face. There's, yeah, there are actually some things.
Yeah, I'm a fan. You can also kill your own creatures if
Yeah,
they have one.
sometimes that's the way to go.
Yeah. So I think Pip and I are stands of this card.
Oh man, I hate
Maybe
that.
I'm a fan. Pip is a grudging not hater.
Yes. I wish I could criticize this card, but I absolutely can't. It is actually just good. Speaking of cards that are
Wait, before we
dubious.
go, I just want to also say I hate how the flavor text is like the soldiers of Kana fight together as one, encouraging the others to achieve their best. But then if you play two of these, the first one's just gonna kill the other. What the hell's up with that?
I feel like there's potential for a much more like tongue-in-cheek flavor text on the card.
I also just wonder, like, is that guy, so like the flavor's like, he makes things go faster. I'm worried about that camel. Is the camel gonna be okay? Is he gonna stab his camel with that spear?
Wait, I thought the flavor. Okay, I thought the flavor was the camel spits on something, and then that makes it go faster.
No, like he stabs things.
You
like,
went to
with the
spitting
spear
instead
to
of
get
the
them to move
big
faster.
spear?
No, I think I agree with Dodger. Spitting definitely does 1 damage.
It's because there's a Hearthstone card called Spitting Camel that deals 1 damage to you every turn.
Ah, okay. See,
That's probably
right. See, I would say I would follow that up with a joke of I only play good card games, but seeing how the last 2 years of MTG is going, I have no legs to stand on there. Okay, back to whatever Pip was saying.
Yeah.
So, okay, Marrow Cruncher. 2 in red, 3/2, Menace. Whenever a creature you control dies, exile a top card at your library. You may play that card until the beginning of your next end step. So this card...
Notably...
Why is this not a hound?
Because Hyena Tribal was a thing in Custard.
Notably, I will say that this card has the most unfun word in Magic, which is non-token.
Yeah, so I was going to say, I don't know if any of you remember, but there was a card in GRN Standard that was a 3/2, did not have Menace, drew a card and lost you life whenever a creature you control died.
I'm
Midnight Reaper.
Yeah, Midnight Reaper is a damn fine Magic card. It's not a broken Magic card by any means. The second that format got like a little bit bigger, the card fell off and wasn't playable for the rest of its standard tenure. But it's a fine Magic card. This card trades the ability to do anything with tokens for Menace, and also you don't get to keep the card. I think this card also makes it really clear that Autumnal Watch is a really silly Magic the Gathering card, since I think you would just rather have Autumnal Watch and do degenerate things there rather than Marrow Crunch. Then don't run 3-drops that make your 1-drops better if your 1-drops are already like better than the 3-drops.
Well, I just think if you're planning on stacking your board and playing cards, this is kind of fits in with that strategy.
I mean, okay,
but you run out of spells to cast, like you run out of mana to like do things with.
Not if all your creatures cost 1.
Yes, so to make your creatures cost 1, just play Autumnal Watch instead.
Yeah, or just like
Well, you don't always have Autumnal Watch, sometimes.
Yeah, but you want to run then like
Blood
Arts and stuff.
Then you'll have other stuff like I don't know. At worst, Brotherhood Consprint, and at best, you just have like reasonable 2-drop sack outlets.
Yeah, I don't know. I think this card, like, I understand why this card's on this list, and I would not be shocked if it plays better than it looks. But just like staring at it, I can't think of what it is bringing to the decks that would run it that they don't already have access to.
Mm-hmm.
Other than it does what you want to do, but more. Which, like, sometimes you just want to do a thing more, and I respect that.
Being a good boy. That's what he brings.
Well, no, he isn't even a good boy. He's not a hound. There's no synergy.
You're saying that only hounds can be good boys? This is actually cat erasure. We're gonna get to that when we get to Alara. Okay.
I am of the opinion that you automatically have to gender all animals clearly, and that means all cats are girls and all dogs are boys. That's the rule. I'm sorry. Also, I
Every
have
other animal is non-binary. I don't make the
yes, that's the
rules.
rule. Also, I have never met a cat that could be described as a good boy, and that just makes me deeply confused about what kinds of cats you're meeting.
Maybe
All
like
right.
okay, you're living on the wrong
I
side of
suggest
Cali.
we progress
Yeah.
to the
Anyways,
next
Oh God,
talking
well,
card.
about
only
good, we were talking about Optimal Watch as a good one red one drop. Here's another one, Seratu Flamebinder, which is red for a 1/2 that whenever one or more creatures you control deals combat damage to a player, you may discard a card. If you do, you draw a card. And you can pay 2 in a red, exile 2 cards from your graveyard. It deals 2 damage to any target. So a pretty powerful and versatile card. The only problem is, unlike what is it, Grim Lavamancer, not very mana efficient on the ability, and that might pull down its playability compared to some of our other. Because we've had a long enough set history that we've built up a cache of good red one drops. I think.
So
So
I'm pretty sure Pip and I have already had an argument about this card. So I kind of
yeah,
know
so
where she
I was
stands.
I was trying to speed run it
Uh,
so we wouldn't have to rehash it. But yeah.
yeah.
this thing being an elemental and a wizard means it can do some neat synergy things. The fact it's a human means it doesn't go in Dodger's favorite decks. I like the first ability.
Wait, yeah, wait. Why is it a human? That's
I think
clearly
if you
not.
can make
I can't,
the
man.
first ability good, this card is good. I think that is in fact the
Yeah.
decider. I think the second ability you have to treat as a bonus and like, it's a good fallback plan where, well, I can't enact most of the graveyard synergies I want to do, so instead I'm just going to start throwing shocks around. But I don't think you can rely on this card for the second ability.
So I will throw some of your words you used earlier against you.
Hmm
3 mana to deal 2 damage is a little expensive, but having that as reach can be nice if you're running a card like Hazaret or Inishtu. And
hmm
I think that the first ability is good. I think that if you are hitting people, getting to Rummage 3 off your one drop is really nice, especially if you're rocking it more than once. And having your Lavamancer both filter your cards, feel itself, and like still being able to use it to deal the last few points of damage, I think makes this card very good in a deck where the synergies line up.
I
You know,
think
if you war driver this, it does survive.
that's synergy right there. I think my main feeling about this card is I think it is a bad Grim Lavamancer, but it's good at everything else that it's doing.
Yeah,
Um,
I mean, yeah, I agree.
and I think the main thing is you shouldn't play this as a removal engine, in that you can do that with Grim Lavamancer. I think you have to treat the second ability primarily as a form of reach,
Mhm.
just because of how inefficient it is at killing creatures. But when it comes to killing players, inefficient doesn't matter. The question is, do you get there?
Yeah, um, yeah, I agree on everything
Philosophy
Pip
of
said.
Fire. Okay.
Cool. All right. Next card is
Speaking of
Shalana
things that
Urshadi.
kill players,
So Shalana is a 4 mana planeswalker. She has 4 starting loyalty. She can +1 to give 2 of your creatures +1 first strike. She can 0 to let you sack a creature, and then she lightning bolts something. Or you can -3 to discard your hand and draw 3. I think the consensus that Pip and I came to on this card is that pretty situational and probably doesn't get there unless your deck is very specific. Um, I think Pip can probably elaborate better than me on that.
Yeah, I think the main thing is, so the -3 is to me the strongest ability that this card has to offer.
Yeah.
The +1 requiring you to have 2 creatures before it really becomes a good ability. Like, +1ing on a single creature is basically never going to feel good. The -3 is good, but I would rather be playing Mindstorm's Eye, which more proactively advances my game plan while still
Mhm.
doing it. Um, the 0 is neat. We don't really have that sort of Goblin Bombardment. Wait, no, actually do have a Goblin Bombardment now because of Imp Den Mother. Um, Basically, I don't disagree that there are decks that can use every single part of this card, but I think it doesn't do anything impressively, and you need to use every single part of it before it's actually good or even playable, maybe. Um, and 4 mana is a lot of mana for that sort of thing. We have
Yeah,
really good 4 mana walkers.
yeah, agreed. I also think that the card requiring you to have a board presence already makes it a pretty weak planeswalker, because planeswalkers that require you to snowball are often pretty weak draws if you don't actually have that sort of situation already set up.
Yeah, and it's not like it's Hell Rider. It's not making you go from like a bit ahead to you've won the game. It's making you go from a bit ahead to a bit more ahead, and that
Yeah,
type of incrementalism is really not where you want to be.
yeah, agreed.
Um,
Um,
Finally, we're out of red.
Out of the red zone. And our first green card is Collapse the Pillars. Pretty simple. Sorcery. Destroy target artifact or enchantment with converted mana cost 4 or less. Now, why did you all put this on this list? I want to hear.
I think that's kind of hype.
Because
in
Intrepid is going up to 4.
You know what? Yeah, fair answer. Let's move along. No, but really, I feel like we have other decent answers at instant speed for like the same, for not cheaper, for the same cost. So and not CMC capped. So I was wondering what the logic behind this was.
So the logic behind this, instead of Nature's Claim, is you're an aggro deck. Pip mentioned earlier that like sometimes in Legacy Zoo you want Path to Exile instead of Swords to Plowshares. Well, it's kind of a similar thing. If you are running a aggressive green deck, you would probably rather decrease the pool of things you can hit, with the caveat that you're not giving your opponent 4 life every.
But we also have Legacy's End, which is literally the path to exile in that analogy.
To be fair, I think Legacy's End giving them a land is a much bigger risk than you can't hit a 5-drop. We have Natural State, which is an instant speed version of this, but it hits only up to CMC 3. It's possible that Intrepid being CMC 4 now kind of makes that less appealing.
If I'm an
I
aggro
just
deck, I would much rather just have sorcery speed and be able to hit more
Yeah,
stuff.
I think the kind of case here is you are a deck that doesn't care about the speed at which this is casting, and you do care about life total, which is green aggro. But then in that case, I would rather it be attached to a creature like Leha's Green Plate or something.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think this card's fine. I think it's probably going to be played more than it should be because it's a newer card and people like looking
People
at
like
it
playing.
think people like people remember the cards they've seen most recently most, so people are most likely to look at this and think, yeah, this is one of our better artifact or enchantment answers.
Yeah, I think it also I think there are going to be some players coming in from external to the format who have seen the set before, and I think that they'll kind of, what do you call it? Not deviate,
Gravitate.
but gravitate. That's the word, to cards that they are familiar with, and I think that's a fair thing. This is not an embarrassing card to be running, and I think maybe I came out a little strong for that, but I think that it is definitely a card that, compared to our other options, I think there are less situations in which I think that this is viable than some of those others.
Yeah. So I'm really excited to talk about the next card we have alphabetically, um, which is Harrow. So Harrow is a weird card because it is card neutral, unless it's countered, in which case you usually lose the game on the spot. But it's an instant speed ramp, and it can notably turn one land into 2 basic lands, which means that you can also fix with it. Like, you can turn your 3rd forest into an island and a mountain. It puts the lands in untapped, so on turn 3 you can Harrow and then hold up a counterspell.
Or you can
Um,
go Herald first.
which yeah, I've done that, which has felt great. I think the card, something you might not expect, is you need to increase the number of basic lands you play by a fairly noticeable amount. I played 4-color control with Harrow and I ran 5 lands. I had 4 Harrows. That definitely was not the right number. I screwed up. I think this
Also,
card is
we do have
powerful. Oh, sorry. You go ahead.
we do have several lands that you deliberately want to sacrifice. Prismatic Vault, which gives you a mox when you sack it.
Yeah, that's
Unstable
true.
Footing, which gets you a basic when you sack it, and kind of Midnight Keep. In that,
Promethean Grotto is, I think, a better example because you
oh
can
yeah,
just play it from the graveyard.
Promethean
Okay.
Grotto.
You
Yeah,
know what card I want to combine with Harrow that is probably not probably not
Yeah.
going to get there, but it's going to be fun. A Flatboat
Mhm.
Artisan.
Oh, that sounds pretty cool, actually. Because you can cast it for 2. That sounds
Yeah.
great. Because you can cast it like on turn 4 and just get a metric ton of lands. No, I'm
I'm
on
always
board with that.
looking for silly Flatboat Artisan combos.
Yeah.
Like I think I won a CNM with Flatboat Artisan plus the 1 mana sorcery that lets you sack your whole board.
Night Hollow Ritual, yeah.
Yeah.
I think at the end of the day, most of those lands are just. Promethean Grotto is the one that might be good enough to play on its own, in which case you want to play it with Harrow. Otherwise, I don't think you should be going for land sack synergies. I also don't think this goes in land sacrifice oriented decks.
Yeah,
But
agreed.
I think the best place for this card is big mana control decks that don't want to tap out in order to ramp, which I played a lot of. Like this goes insanely well into like bug variants of the heart attack lists.
This is
Since those
also
decks. Oh yeah, you go ahead.
it's also very good in Markarth. Or not, I don't know about very good, but like it
Yeah, I
does
mean
let
that's
you do differently
yeah,
named lands at instant speed, and yeah,
that was the list I was trying it in. The main issue I ran into was if you're a Markarth deck, you usually want to be 4 colors
right.
because
And then it's
Rug
hard
is
to run
not that
too many
powerful,
basics.
and you run out of basics really quickly. So I
Yeah.
think that's a little bit awkward, but it's definitely not the end of the world.
Okay, should we move on?
Sounds good.
Yep, and I want to talk about this one, Gila
Yeah, please do.
Emergence. Um, this is a card that I played a decent amount with in its standard, and I love this card, and I think that it's going to be a card that I think people are both going to like overestimate and underestimate. And what I mean with that is people are going to be like, "Oh my god, it's a 6/6 haster for 5 that can't be countered and it is protected from removal. That's crazy." And it's like, well, cool, but we also like it just being a beater that can get chumped is sometimes bad. We also have a lot of good instant speed removal, and at 5 mana we have more value plays like the Scions. However, I also do think that out of the sideboard, the can't be countered is actually like surprisingly strong, and I think should be reasonably relevant in some matchups. I think that dodging sorcery suit removal is less relevant, but I think that having that kind of pseudo protection is strong. And if you curve up into this, you can sometimes just end games by putting pressure on an opponent. So I think that it's a card that not every deck that people think is going to want it is going to actually want it, but I think that there are going to be a decent number of decks which actually will play this in some capacity.
I think the fact that it's an enchantment is also pretty relevant. So like imagine legend weaving for this out of the sideboard or something. That seems kind of sweet. I
That
think
also takes
they're
7 mana, but yeah.
yeah, but like legend weaving decks are control decks. They can hit that much mana, you know. And I think that there are plenty of other ways that you can like take advantage of this being an enchantment. Whether you're like an enchantress deck or civilized deck or whatever.
So I feel awkward because this card feels designed to counter me specifically. Um, but then I remember that I also choose to play single target removal, so it's okay. Uh, remember, kids, don't try to pith wilt this. You will not be happy. Um, if this is put on a basic land, you also can't deem unworthy the creature, although you can deem unworthy the aura. Um, but yeah, this card is slightly more resilient than it looks like it ought to be, but it still dies to our 1 mana removal.
I also think that the fact that it doesn't have trample is kind of rough because
Yep.
there are going to be matchups where your opponent just chump blocks this to oblivion and you're like, well, I guess I spent 5 mana for nothing.
Yep.
So I'm not very high on this card, but I would be considering it in a deck that cares about the enchantment aspect in some way.
That or
I-
some deck where you're putting it on a Monument of Queens.
Well,
I will. I
then
will
you're
say,
actually
imagine
paying
the
more. You're
days
paying
when you
extra
could.
more.
Okay, actually, I guess we should talk about our next card before I get into
Yeah.
this. But the days where you could curve our Farseek into our next card into this in a standard format, those are some of the most beautiful times in my life. I will tell you, because you're just putting so much pressure on your opponent, and then you can also instantly just play like a bunch of colors so that you can have the best interaction. It was a great time, and unless anyone else has any other comments on this card, I'm gonna.
No, let's get to the
No,
good
let's go
one.
ahead.
Yeah, I think this is likely to be one of the more powerful cards in our list. It's the Green God. And of course, green always gets the best things these days, so it's no surprise. Jabaya, Devoted Farmer, 3 and a green for a 2/2, and you're thinking, well, that's lame. But you get to tutor up any land, which, given that we have a lot of powerful utility lands, is pretty good. Intrepid has just been nerfed to 4, so if you're in a green deck, you can get a land directly to your battlefield, so there's some competition there. And if you control 5 or more lands with different names, which basically reads, if you control 5 or more different lands, which you will if you're playing this, not off a dork.
Notably, it was nerfed to 6.
Nerfed
Yes,
to 6?
because this is a better iteration of that design.
Okay, yeah. So 6 makes it so that you can't just play this on 4 and then immediately flip it. You have to have some other land ramp. But still pretty strong, and it becomes Jobaya the World Shepherd, 3/3 indestructible, and at the beginning of combat, you target land you control becomes a beast with trample and haste, where X is a number of differently named lands you control. So just a powerful finisher. You search up like your best utility slash man land, and you get like two creatures on the board to boot. It's just a really powerful card.
Question: This is MSEM's first farmer, right?
Correct.
Creature type farmer. I always thought that was fun.
There was a couple other ones in scriptures though.
Okay.
The one other thing
and
I will
also, I
note,
guess, are we planning to back errata anything from stuff like Harvest Festival for the farmer type?
no, both Simon and Hersey were made aware of this and said, no, we'd rather keep our things as citizens. Hersey in particular, like, has citizen tribal in her standard, so I don't think we would have seen that happen. But
Got you, got you.
one other thing to consider about Jobaya, like, yes, Monument of Queens has just been nerfed, but when Jobaya animates the Monument of Queens, even if it doesn't get the keywords, it does still have the +1/+1 counters. And you also do have the option to animate it uh, first, and then Jobaya will override its toughness power, but it won't override the keywords. So
Yeah.
if you
That's actually
if you
pretty
invest 4
disgusting.
mana,
Yeah. So you
you can
search up
still do
Monument,
that.
untap, Jabaya flips, you pay 4 to pump up your Monument, and then you swing in for probably 6 or 7 flying trample, lifelink,
And
soup.
Yeah, so
yeah, you
there's
win the
still
game.
some synergy with Monument, but you do have to pay. You have to invest mana
You,
into it.
Notably, Monument can tap itself though for here because it's
Yeah.
going to be untapped by Jobaya, so it's closer to being the original cost. Like I still think this is obviously much weaker than the original synergy, but for instance, my 5/0 Podlight list ran Jobaya as one of its primary 4 drops that it tutored up every chance it could, and Jobaya then finds Monument of Queens, and it just creates this neat little solve this. You need to answer both of these threats, and if you don't answer either, you're probably dead.
Yeah,
Um,
I think long term Jobaya is going to have one of the biggest impacts on MSEM
yeah.
because
The
it's
other
just
thing,
such a
Now, I would also like you to imagine a world where there is a standard format where this still transformed on 5 and didn't transform on upkeep, it transformed on end step. So,
and also
oh
the
my
land
god.
had trample.
uh,
I'm
yeah.
I have many regrets about the times that I have played or not played Custard, and the fact that I didn't get to play Crest with Jobaya, it saddens me because that sounds actually broken in half. Um,
Hmm.
but
All right.
anyway,
Next card.
Yeah.
sounds good.
Cool. So Oasis Climber. This is my kind of card. It is a 4 mana 4/5 with trample, and it has Assault 2. Whenever a creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it, deal damage to the player. So if you just look at this card in a vacuum, you're getting a 4/5 for 4, which is about standard rate. It's not really MSEM rate. Um, it has trample, which is nice, and you can also, if you attack with it, you can pay 2. It's a 5/6, and then if it tramples over, which is pretty likely, you'll be able to draw a card with it. I think that this is also pretty neat in that it gives the curiosity effect to all of your +1/+1 counter creatures, and that's what makes me kind of consider this for like a Katie shell on the top end. I don't know. I'm curious what you guys think of it. I think the rate might be a little clunky.
Um, I was going to disagree that this is a Dodger card because I think this card's actually good on its front face.
Oh, I was
Um,
going to disagree. It's a Dodger card because it has a type line creature human.
um, I think this is interesting how similar is to Katie because Katie's plus ability also gives the sabotage and draw card.
Yeah.
I think this is the main issue I have with this card is the fact it's 4 mana. I think if you're running one of those aggro decks, you have very few slots for 4 drops.
Mhm.
I do think this is better than all of the other options that currently exist, though.
I think
Like
this
this
is
is better than
better
Mossy
than
Companion.
Musty Companion in like
Yeah, strong,
in
strong
any
grade.
deck. Yeah.
I think the only time when you want Mossy Companion is when you're specifically concerned about flyers being back on the menu.
Yeah, I
Because
mean,
Mossy Companion's Vigilance Reach does do a number on Phoenixes.
if this were um if this were not a human, it would 100% be in London instead of Musty Companion.
Right.
Um,
But also, like, it swings 6 mana for a 5/6 trample, uh, Ophidian, or whatever it is. That that card is, like, actually not embarrassing. And this being able to split across multiple turns and having a lord effect makes it kind of great.
You also
If you
if you
if you
you don't necessarily have to pay the assault if you
have
manage
another
to
source in
put a
the
counter on
counters,
it. Yeah.
yeah, that's a good point. Like Katie down tick or whatever.
Yeah.
I think this card's real. I think it is not the most impactful card in this set for red green counters as an archetype, but I
Mhm.
think this card is very good.
It feels like a nice 2 of or 3 of for the top end of counter set.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Um,
I'm going to move us along a little faster here because I do
Yeah,
want to finish
please
this
do.
hopefully under or at 3 hours. So our next card, Rudai Pathfinder.
It's a
Who?
1-drop that you can pump equal to your Wanderlust. This means it can root wall to kill people, but also it's a 1 mana 1/1, and you need to pay 2 mana to make it big, and it doesn't even get that big on 2.
And it doesn't have
Like,
trample, so
yeah, it doesn't have Shamble. I think this card's fine. I don't think it's much to write home about. The Scout type line is technically relevant. We have Scout Tribal in this format. Um, but
I've been considering this for a couple different survivor builds, particularly the 3-color plus ones, because I think that like it's about the best rate you can get for a 1-drop in that archetype. Um, but
that's
I think
sad.
it's not like I don't know. I wouldn't say it's sad because um, it does give you some amount of scaling, uh, which
just
that can
just play Elvish
sometimes.
Opportunist, please. I am begging you.
Well, I'm just saying, like sometimes you need density of these things, you know.
Yeah,
Um,
I'm not disagreeing. I just think that this card is not a good 1-drop. This card is a
yep.
very good mid-game creature, but I think as a 1-drop, this card blows because it functionally does nothing unless you spend 2 mana in it. And I think in the early game, especially in a deck that wants to run something like this, you cannot afford to do that. But I think treating this as like a 4-drop weirdly in your curve, like you're like, okay, I'm going to play this when I hit 4 lands. I'm going to be able to hold up mana to defend it or to interact with my opponent. Then I'm going to start beating the ever-loving stuffing out of my opponent when I untap with it. I think that's pretty real.
Yeah, in
But
general, I agree with pretty much everything you said.
all right.
Yeah.
Let's get on to another card you can dump mana into to pump it, because Sacrificial Bull's next, and boy howdy is this one hell of a card.
Yeah, this card's actually kind of insane. I've only played with it a couple games. I'm already
Yeah, this card
like
is
this
the
is
truth.
very real.
This card is better than every other graveyard hate card I've been playing in creature-based decks, and the only reason why you should run other ones is if you want a little bit of diversity, or you need to hate out aggro decks in particular. I think Purging Watchkeep is
Yeah,
marginally better against.
rest in peace, Purging Watchkeep.
I think Purging Watchkeep is still playable. Like, I think you just only want them in the same deck that you already want Sacrificial Bull. I just think the first 2 Purging Watchkeeps are better than the 3rd and 4th Bulls,
Yeah,
I
because
didn't
Bull
understand
does
that last
worst in
statement, but I
yeah.
gotcha.
Bull is worse in multiples, is the logic. Like,
What
once you've
so
eaten all of the lands out of graveyards,
Ah,
you no
okay.
longer
Ah, okay.
what
want
are
to
the
That makes
deactivate
what are the
spells.
sense.
scenarios where you want Spore Flow Protector over this?
Uh, you don't play Flow Protector over this. The exception,
Hmm.
like, Simon is currently on it in the Chi Li deck,
Yeah.
and I would need to ask to understand why, but I feel like the only reason is because you specifically want to go wide. I
Well,
think the
Spore Flow
I think
does scale
starting three
better than this in
toughness
the
can
late game.
sometimes be relevant. Like you said, just eating
sure,
Banished Companion with not having to trade.
yeah, that's
Yeah,
fair, that's fair.
and Spore Flow also does complicate math a lot for your opponent in combat, because the potential to put a counter on any of your creatures at instant speed can
Yeah,
really
that causes
make it tough
problems.
for them. Yeah, so I don't think it's black and white, but I think Sacrificial Bull is definitely your card if you're operating on a pretty tight mana schedule.
Yeah, okay. It's green. It's not black or white. Don't know what you're talking about there.
Um, yep, this card's good. It used to be more busted. I have no idea why that was the case, but I'm excited to move on.
I mean, I think the main thing was it was in a format without like
Fetch
fetch
lands.
lands that it had fetch lands, but
It
like
had fetch lands. That's the
Oh.
thing. That
the
card,
thing is though, like the fetch lands weren't like ubiquitously played, and maybe that was a mistake there too. But I think that
yes, it was.
Sack Bull definitely did see like its play rate has gone up since that time.
Yeah,
It's like improved, but I think that like yeah, back when it used to also draw cards equal to its
yeah.
power, that was something.
That's the thing,
I
is when you sacrificed it, you also drew cards, and when it was entering MSM, we were like, okay, so there's literally no way to favorably answer this once you untap with it. So let's not make Scavenging Ooze that much of a little punk.
Yeah, fair.
So onto Wandering Warden is next.
Yep.
Yep.
I think this card's interesting because it fulfills a similar niche to Oasis Claimer, just a little bit lower on the curve. It's 3 mana 3/4. It has Assault for 1 green, and whenever a creature you control assaults, it gains indestructible until end of turn. I agree with Dodger's assessment. You're not playing this in like Assault Tribal. It's just in here as a good 3-drop. I think the one worry I would have is I assume our 3-drop slot's already kind of crowded in most of the decks that want this. Like
Yeah.
custom Magic designers really love printing pushed 3-drops. That's for some reason a trend.
Cough,
Um,
lone
think
survivor. Cough.
yes,
So I
absolutely.
actually think it's not that crowded, especially in the
Okay.
survivor decks.
That's fascinating.
I think particularly
Even
in
with like
green.
Eroda and stuff in that slot.
Well, Eroda isn't even in my current, but I considered this, but I didn't ever like end up including it because I think War Pride Champion outclasses this pretty hard. I think in a deck that isn't running as many creatures, this kind of like is more self-sufficient, but I'm unsure what meta this exactly wants to fit in because I think costing 3 and just having 4 toughness isn't enough to protect you from the black removal spells that are being played, especially
Mhm.
cards like Fifth Wilt and also the white removal spells. And I just don't think that the rate on this really makes me want to put it in any particular deck enough to actually include it.
Yeah.
Which is unfortunate because I like the card quite a bit, but and if you are somehow running Assault Tribal, then this is like pretty sweet. But I think that deck
Also,
is pretty garbage.
yeah, I would recommend instead.
Yeah.
I will avoid getting fully on my soapbox because of time constraints, but don't build decks centered around a single set's mechanic. It will be bad unless that set was grossly overpowered, and
Unless that
most of
set
these sets
mechanic,
aren't.
unless that set
Agreed.
mechanic was infect.
I mean, even then, you don't
Ener-
run every infect creature. Just run
Enter-
8 infect creatures.
Yeah, yeah. Okay.
Hey,
On to it.
what is this harmony slander that is going on here?
No, in fact, this is exactly directed at everyone who has decided to build a Harmony deck ever.
all right,
Uh,
all right. Let's move on.
Okay. So
Anku the
we're
Primordial is a 6 mana 5/7 with Indestructible, and when it attacks, defending player sacrifices an artifact, creature, enchantment, and land. He says, "Fuck your civilization."
Yeah, pretty
Um,
much.
the awkward thing about this is Ravaging Tyrant, I think, is better than this if you're cheating it out. And I don't like the idea of casting this because Indestructible, it's not trinket text, but if this is the only creature you have, it dies to Exeunt, it gets Pith Wilted, it gets Journey's Ended. Like, it it is dodging some number of the most played removal spells, but it's not all of them. Also, if
Yeah.
you play this and your opponent untaps and plays a Lucian, how bad do you think you feel on a scale of 1 to 10? Because I'm guessing like it's like 7-ish.
yeah. It's just
It
like
doesn't.
yeah, indestructible doesn't exist as a
What I
keyword.
don't like about this is that it doesn't really hit most decks that hard for
Yeah.
the
The
setup
place this
of
was really good was in
either
like
cheating
was
it
in
out.
Crest, where you would cheat this out early, and it also had haste, so you would immediately get to swing in with it. And unless they had exactly a removal spell up, you were like, okay, now you're always going to be sacrificing a land each turn. But we don't really have a sneak attack, or we don't have like a Crest deck like that, so it's like, okay, well, I guess not.
Yeah. I think we're all pretty in agreement about this card not quite getting there in this form.
Yeah, so someone played as a commander in MSEDH though. I think that would be. I don't know
It
how
seems
that
like
would work, but I think that would be
it's like a
sick.
great EDH card.
I mean, it only hoses one player and it needs to attack. I
Yeah.
don't think it's
Yeah.
great. I think it's fine. Like, I think it's probably better than most of our Jund options, but I also kind of love Bile of the
Yeah,
World,
Bile
so
of the
that's
World.
probably
I think.
where I'd be.
Yeah, there was one game night where someone brought that. It was actually really sick. It's a really fun control-ish commander.
All right. So next one
Speaking of
is
a
the one
card that's the
that you've all
opposite
been
of
making.
everything we said,
Yeah.
yeah, Border Makers. Just it's so good. It just like I just want to say, Kinkin is an enchantment. Like
That is another card that
I
I cut at the last minute from my Marnus deck, which was Kinkin, which I think probably should also be in the deck.
Dodger about to
But
make Dreamsight civilized
Yeah.
aggro.
I'm more of just questioning how did Dodger pick the wrong answer on like all of these different 50/50s of like, do I include this or this? I guess I'll cut that one.
Dodger
It's like,
never play
no.
fight. Never play a fighting game, dog.
I've played Smash. I already know that I'm not good at those games.
I think
But
this
yeah,
card,
I think Boilermakers is awesome. We all know Siege Rhino can do really ridiculous things,
yeah,
and
I think this has a higher ceiling than Siege Rhino because 4 damage is a lot more than 3, weirdly.
mhm,
And I think Vigilance and Death Touch are kind of insane keywords.
yeah,
But the 3 toughness gives it a huge weakness that Siege Rhino didn't have. I'm just assuming you have Civilized on always if you're playing this in a deck. I think 4 mana is when that starts to become a kind of trivial hoop. Um,
yeah.
I
So in
think this
my
card's kind of nuts to flicker also.
oh yeah, it's great to flicker. So like I've seen people running this in like with Tanager Typhoon,
Yeah,
um,
that
which
sounds very real.
I think is a great way to use it. I used it as the top end on my deck to try to some like extra reach on there, but I wasn't running any way to flicker it and stuff. But
Yeah.
I think that if you are kinkenning, this is a good kinken target. Um, and I think that like even if even if it does eat a removal spell, draining 4 and then 1-for-1ing is still probably enough value that you're okay with it as long as you're pressuring your life total. Um, so I think this card is one of the best payoffs for Civilized in the set, if not the best. Um, and I'm pretty excited to see uh, additional ways to try to abuse it.
So the next card is one of my favorites out of the set, although I have been disappointed in every shell I've tried in so far, but I think that's more of the shells rather than the card.
I
We
love
have
it.
Bounty of the Gardens. So it's blue and a green for an instant, and you get an XX green and blue plant token where X is the number of differently named lands you control. So notably, it doesn't scale up. This is a card where you kind of feel stupid for having to cast on 2. Like,
Mhm.
sometimes you will, sometimes it will be the right move, but Ash Code Bear is not a very playable magic card. When you cast this for like 5 or 6, this card starts to look pretty goddamn gross.
Yeah.
And where this card gets stupid is you cast it for 3 or 4 in the mid game, and then you Cane Dancer it back.
Yeah,
Um,
I'm putting this in blue green tempo. It's just
yeah, it's very much everything that deck wants. Um, the main thing that's a little bit awkward about this card is it's not very versatile. It's a very straightforward card. It does exactly what it looks like it does. It makes a creature. That creature is always, quote unquote on curve for the amount of mana you have access to, but it doesn't always cost that amount of mana. Um,
So
yeah.
I actually don't like this in tempo, and it's for the
Mhm.
reason you said. You're not likely to get that many lands in your tempo because you're probably running like 21, 22 lands, right? Um,
I
and
mean,
sure, like, well, I don't know. I mean, if you're consistently
My
getting this
feeling
at
is
3,
that like
you run
I'm surprised
Sag.
by you saying that because I think that like the type of tempo deck that you've spawned, which is the kind of honor and tempo decks, I think that this is probably like an easy slot in there
I
because I
think
think
it is
like
good in honor and tempo, but I'm concerned about how much better it is than by the sea. Um,
Yeah. This
and
card
I'm not
has
sure.
been underwhelming in Bant Flash, and that was a deck that I thought on paper was going to really abuse it because that deck has a bunch of Cane Dancers and it wants to hit 4 mana for Bant Charm, but it wasn't nuts. It was it was good. Uh, it sometimes wasn't even good. It was somewhere in the okay to good spectrum, and I was expecting much more of this card, which makes me a little bit worried.
Yeah, I think what this card does do well is if you are playing a ramp deck or if you're playing a control deck that wants like a cheap, easy to slot in finisher. I think this is actually a really great finisher because you can flash it in for only 2 mana, and you can still hold up your counter magic or removal or whatever. Um, and sometimes like if you just control the board, drop a 6/6 for 2 mana, and then smack them a couple times, you win the game. So I don't especially if your deck is incidentally running Cane Dance. Like you can run Cane Dance.
Yeah.
So that is where I think that um because I just don't expect tempo decks to get that many lands in play.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a format where our tempo decks have historically usually been ones that hit 4 to 5 mana because you really want to have the ability to double spell, whether that's double counter magic or counter magic plus deploy a threat.
Yeah,
But
and the existence of Portal Fracture does
yeah,
complicate this a little bit, but um
this card
and
also, just for the record, it really was not very good in Blacklist Assailant. I had very high hopes for it in that deck. It was bad.
Okay.
If your
Yeah.
deck doesn't want a vanilla creature, even a very big vanilla creature, because I realize big is technically a keyword, um, you don't actually want this card.
It has must be block disabled.
Yep.
Yeah,
And
I think that like it's weird, but I think there's lots of times where in a control deck you would probably prefer Recall Forgotten Aeons, just straight up.
Yeah. And I think
it does
a
also
shell I'm
just die
interested in
to
this in.
Pithwilt. Like,
I mean,
Pithwilt for free, just
it trades evenly on tempo though. Like that's only an issue if you were relying on this card. But trading Bounty of the Gardens for Pithwilt isn't actually a loss. Um, I think the shell for this deck that I'm interested in, but I don't know what it would look like, would be a control deck that verges on ramp. So something where you do have interaction, but your real plan is to just go big over the top. And
I
I
mean,
think this card is
the
good in
problem
that
is
deck.
that like we do have that deck. It's called Heart Attack, but Heart Attack doesn't exactly. Heart
Right,
Attack,
it has a better kill.
yeah,
So the question is like, is there a Bant ramp deck, or is there a ramp deck that isn't relying on Harvest Adina, or is there,
yeah. See,
you know,
once Dodger hacks into the mainframe and deletes Mastery of the Veil, then we all move over to Bounty of the Gardens.
yeah. All right, so Death Pit's Hawker, black red for a 2/2 haste. Whenever another creature you control dies, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. This is another Blood Artist. We have some really nuts Blood Artists to begin with. Notably, this only procs when creatures you control dies, which is a big difference from a lot of Blood Artists, because one of the things that some of those do is generate board states where your opponent can't block, because if they block, they just die. This having haste is a strong favor in its point, but it's not unique in being a 2-drop, 2-power, uh, what is it called? Zulport Cutthroat variant, because we have Mogri Oracle that also scries, and we have
Paka.
Twilight Blade.
Twilight Blade. Like we have, and we also have the white black one, which can be cast from a graveyard, although that one's only a 1/1. Like we're kind of good on Zula Park Cutthroats. We have a lot of them. This
Yeah.
one's fine. I don't think this one changes any of the power levels of the deck, but I think you probably want to play it over some of the ones you're already running.
Yeah, it's just pick your preference at this point.
Yep. So, Demi, Origin Seeker. 1 blue, red, flash, 2/1. When it enters battlefield, counter target spell unless an opponent. Counter target spell an opponent controls unless they give you X 1/1s where X that spell's convert mana cost. It's a Punisher effect. Those usually suck. The options for this are pretty good. If you play out like a 1 or 2 drop threat, they go to Pith Wilt it, and you give them the choice of either I played a 2/1 and countered your Pith Wilt, or I played a 4/3. There's not a lot of good answers there. I think this card is more of a sideboard card than a main deck card. I think it's a little bit clunky for the main deck, but I think as a sideboard card, it's kind of powerful, especially because if it's an open deck list format, your opponent has to play around it, and like keep it in mind. It is pretty awful against board wipes, and the fact it's a 2/1 rather than a 3/2 as the original incarnation was makes me it's not a good threat on its own. It's only a good threat if you have a spell to counter, and in that case, it's only good if your opponent lets you counter it.
So a
Yeah,
deck that I thought it was very good in was Gateway's Blue Red Wizards deck, because that deck has ways to buff your board, and it also has wizard synergies, and it likes to leave up mana. So I think that deck is a very natural fit for Demi.
You never wanna you're tapping out on that deck every single turn. Despite the fact you're a
Oh
blue
yeah,
deck, you're never leaving mana
Okay.
untapped. You just
your
want to clear it out.
scorching face. You're just yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
well, one
Like
deck I do
I
want to
treat
try this in is, and this is not a good deck by any means, or I expect that it won't be a good deck, but blue red this plus Hushing Word, and then you just play like um, countermat. You just play like counter burn, and then it's like if they're like okay with resolving their stuff and taking damage, you just end up killing them via burn anyways. I just want to see how
yes.
that plays out. It's probably
Yeah,
not going to be good. I've already mentioned that, but I think that it's an interesting enough I guess like
angle
not
of attack.
angle of attack. Yeah.
I think it's better than Hushing Word, because I think the fact it has a creature is a very big part of what makes it good. I think also it and Hushing Word kind of play off each other in the fact that they implement, amplify each other, but also the fundamental issue is they're punishers. You're never going to avoid that. So let's do Amarabi's Disciple next.
Excuse me. Sure. Yeah. Amarabi's Disciple is a Winding Constrictor, essentially. It is a 2-mana 3/2. It has the Winding Constrictor effect, and it also has a. So the Winding Constrictor effect will apply to its own assault ability as well. So I think this is the first Winding Constrictor that we ever have had in MSEM, if I'm
That
correct.
is not even a little true.
Okay, I'm very wrong, but it is a pretty efficiently statted one.
Yeah, 3/2 trample ain't bad.
Yeah, can you say Primal Ruffian?
Yeah, the sick curve that I've described numerous times while hyping this card up is turn 1 Primal Ruffian, turn 2 Amarabi's Disciple, swing with Primal Ruffian, it's a 2/3 now. Turn 3, play Katie, downtick Katie, put 6 power on board, swing, your opponent takes 10 damage. A large percentage of that is trample.
Yeah.
But the card does exactly what you think it does. We have all the synergies you'd expect for it. In my experience, the issue with that deck is you have 2 high-quality 1-drops, and then afterwards, you don't really have, like, synergistic 1-drops. And when you have this card and Katie, I think you really want to start looking for more synergies because you have such a powerful force multiplier for those synergies. So Emerging Onkelim is kind of a weird card because I think it's a very good cheat out target since it wipes the board and deals your opponent like 5 to 6 damage in the process, while also still being a 4/4 that continues to pressure people. I think it's kind of a bad top end if you're trying to actually cast it. 6 mana is so much mana. But this also probably does a lot of stupid things in EDH decks. Like,
Oh yeah.
I don't know. I don't know if there's
And
like
EDH
a
just kills
elemental
people
tribal
instead.
EDH deck, but yeah.
I like this as a blink target, kind of, but or like I guess if you're cheating this out, you're unlikely to have a blink effect, so I'm not super high on it, but yeah. Okay.
All
Yeah,
right.
if you have a 6-drop that you're not cheating out, it better be Lyran Alpha or Rock and Roll, basically.
Yeah. And I think this is better against mid-range and aggro decks than either of those, but not by a lot. Oh, this is really good against Roll. Wait, no, Roll's tokens are elementals. This is really bad against Roll. Do not run this against Roll.
Yeah, I was about to say, like, hold up.
Oh, that's so sad.
Run this with Roll. Now we're somewhere.
Yeah.
So Epic of Anku is a okay 5-drop, a pretty good 7-drop, and if you're casting this for 9 mana, you should just be on Mastery of the Veil. As a 5-drop, you get this modal between 4 damage to each creature, which is nice, draw 3, lose 3, which is nice, or reanimate something, which is nice. Like, all 3 of those effects are effects that, in standards, you'd be perfectly happy paying 5 mana for. In MSEM, it's a little bit dicier, but the flexibility does help it. This being multicolored means it dodges some of our counter magic. It being a 5-drop means it dodges another large portion. It's kind of clunky versus the rest of the counter magic, but you can't win them all. But the flexibility on this card, being able to be cast as a 7-drop, I think is kind of one of its selling points, and I don't think that mode is very real. And I think the other kind of tragedy of this card is that it's the biggest mana modes of it don't actually allow you to kill people. Like, if this had a mode that just allowed you to burn people out, I would probably think this is straight up better than Master of the Veil because it has better failed cases.
Oh, his target player draws 3, loses 3?
Yep.
Yeah.
Or yeah, something. But
I definitely agree that I don't really think this is where I want to be because it actually scales properly, unlike Master of the Veil.
Yeah.
I just think that like most of these modes are stuff that you don't really want to do more than one anyway. Like, I'm not super stoked about drawing 6, losing 6. And I'm not super stoked about dealing 4 damage twice. If that makes sense.
You can mix and match though, because I think board wipe and you also gas back up is kind of real. I
Yeah,
think board wipe.
good.
I wanna. This was a really good card in its standard time.
Yeah.
I'm gonna miss it. It's very sad that I think that lots of these cards are cards that are kind of exciting for a reasonably powered standard environment, but I think MSEM just has much better options. But I would definitely encourage people to check out the set in isolation. Like, go read over it after we're done, because it's a fun set.
Okay, so Keeper of Codices is kind of weird because I think the card is really niche. The fact it's a slow flicker means you can't really combo off with it, which is a good thing. Um, it allows you to draw an extra card each turn by flickering a Kinken. Like you curve Kinken into this, into swing, but that's not that powerful. Like, I think this card's power has to come from its flexibility and the fact that the fail case is a 3 mana 3/2 with flash, which is fine. Like, that's a fine place to be, but I don't think this card is like ever going to be the nuts.
I'm actually struggling to think of any deck where I want this. Is that just me?
Well, I'm being generous, but probably not.
I feel like if I'm saying this, the card's not going to get there.
I feel
Yeah.
like there's gotta be like some like
I kind of
gotta
I
be like
looked
a
at this card and
vanishing
I was
card.
like, I don't know why this is on the list, but I assume they had a reason, and I guess not.
This is a card that is just good enough for me to begrudgingly say, I'm not going to cut this. I also forgot that it no longer had infinite combos associated with it because it did during its standard tenure. I agree strongly with the decision for it to no longer infinitely combo ever. But yeah.
Yeah, rest in
Alright,
peace, vehicle combos. Okay.
so Lose, who is probably not the best 2 blue-green Planeswalker in MSEM, but they're gonna do their best. So enters with 4 star loyalty and has a +1 of turning any other non-aura permanent into a land that taps for mana of any color until your next turn. So can hose down a single attacker, can hose down opponent planeswalkers. Is just a very flexible answer, with the downside of turning it into a mana rock for your opponent, which you can usually handle. It can also do sometimes like niche circumstances of giving you +1 mana by turning another one of your random doohickeys into lands.
Hey, I think we
Um,
found the perfect use for burning sulfur.
that's very rude. I I
Okay,
think
time to slash this in Ponzo. Let's go.
we have vanishing. We just have boomerang in the format. You +1, you turn someone's 5 drop into a land, you bounce to their hand. They're like, why didn't you just boomerang it? You could have targeted it already. You're like,
To a
I
certain
don't think
dominance.
so. I'm pretty sure I can only hit lands with boomerang. I think that's the rule. Anyway, this card also has a -2, which is draw a card and make a 1/1 spirit with flying, and a -7, which is, a game ending Planeswalker 7. At the beginning of your end step, you get a 6/6 trample. The
Yeah.
-2 isn't very good. I think this card's main mode is the +1, with the fact that you can, turn it into a draw 2, make 2/1/1s as kind of its fail case mode. Obviously, that's a lot worse than Helene Trent. Obviously, the kind of big mana decks don't want this. They want to be on
Oh,
Mabel.
yeah. When you
We
said
now
not the
have,
best two blue green, I honestly just thought of Mabel, and now that you mentioned
yeah.
Helen, I'm like, man, because
I
I feel like
I
being
think
stuck as
Lose
like a
is
4 mana removal spell, even like a essentially type
Four-mana
agnostic
removal
one.
spell that can win the game. Like, I think this card is a lot better in this format than it is in standard because it's a lot more likely your opponent has one win con they're relying on board, or like
Mhm.
you can answer the rest of their things and then get them down to one win con.
Yeah, and
Um,
I think the flexibility of this, being able to turn off their monument or villainy, or turn off their intrepid or whatever, like
yeah,
there are a lot of different permanent types that you need to deal with in MSEM, and I think the fact that this can just do that is kind of nice. It's also a walker you can play into empty board and just cantrip and make a flyer. Like I think it's just a very like all around card if you're looking for something that can cover a lot of different basic fronts. Um,
I so my experience playing against this card was I was on Podlight, and I played Jobaya, and they Losade and just kept plussing on the Jobaya until they finally had a removal spell, and they killed the Jobaya and then just started plussing on the monument I had instead. And that felt kind of powerful.
yeah.
Like, being a removal spell you can move around and there's not really a thing it misses is key. I think this card is solidly fine. I don't think it's a reason to go into blue green, but I think if you're in blue green, you should look at it. I don't think it's one of those cards where you need to justify not playing it, but this
Mhm.
is a powerful tool to have access to.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with your analysis of that pretty much. Yeah.
All right,
Fair. I think I'm a little bit
let's
lower on it than you are, but fair.
let's talk about oppress the weak, or as I will internally always think about it, oppress the gamers. Um, the main reason this card is on this list is because it's a Cane Dancerable removal spell, which is not something we get particularly often. and the upside of being a 2 mana kill your dude draw card if you're civilized is kind of good. Um, I think if you're in like a bug or Bant, or sorry, a bug or Esper, I assume Esper for Border Makers
Mhm.
civilized deck, this is a very powerful card to use. Um, but I don't think this is gonna like change the shape of the format at all.
Yeah, I'm a fan of this. I don't think it's worth significantly altering your deck in order to play this card because, like, sure, you get 2 mana, like, kill a creature, draw a card, but it also doesn't really, like, save you against some of the bigger threats that people might be cheating out in a way that, like, something like Exant does.
Well,
So,
I have to ask, like, assuming you're doing playing this for like the Cane Dancer, what if we just treat civilized as flavor text here? Is just blue black -4/-4 good?
I
It's
think
not
that's
good enough
Good
for this
enough.
format. It is good, and it hits most of the things you care about, but you really notice it when it doesn't. And the fact that this is taking
yeah.
a slot over like Extenuate or whatever other 2 mana removal spell you could be running, and it misses Scions, that's going to hurt a lot. Um,
Yeah.
I think in a vacuum, this card's objectively good. Like black black target creature gets -4. Grasp of Shadows, whatever
Grasp
that one
of
was. Grasping
why
Darkness.
am I grasp
Yeah,
of
Grasp of Shadows.
Grasp of Darkness. That card was good. At least in the standard, it was shared, or at least in the standard, it didn't share with this member. Um, in MSEM, it's fine. It's passable. It'll answer most of the things you care about, but you do notice the things it misses, and your deck doesn't have infinite room for 2 mana removal spells. So if you're choosing this, you're choosing it over something else, and I think the things it misses are going to cost you. So you really want Civilized if you're running this.
Yeah, I ran this in my, like, Isochron 1 civilized deck, and it seems good there, although I haven't played that deck. But, yeah.
Okay. Moving on to Protect the Farm. So we already have a similar card to this in Joyous Explorer from Love Song, but that also isn't an enchantment. Uh, I think that like it still dies to Pithwold, but not dying to creature removal is probably pretty real. Um, it also, I guess, like the trade off is also Joyous Explorer makes artifact tokens. I remember right. This doesn't. Um, I think that if you're planning on doing now that Into the Unknown has been nerfed, if you're planning to do like some sort of like Naya landfall thing, I could see running this as in some split with that. Um, but the problem is like you also already have Splitting Bloom, so yeah, I think
Yeah, it was. That
it's
was
it,
the one I was
it,
thinking of.
it's just crowded in the 2-drop landfall make a 1/1 token slot.
I think if you're running this, it's either copies 5 through 8 or copies 9 through 12. Um,
Uh, just
I'm
maybe 9 and 10. Maybe 9 and 10 is the right number.
maybe 9, 10, yeah. I'm actually, I think this might be better than Joyous Explorer just because it dodges creature removal.
How much does Joyous Explorer's activated cost?
I
It
think it
actually
costs
costs the exact same, which is I
Okay,
wait. Are you telling me that it wasn't inspired by this?
no, it was not inspired by
Oh
this, and
man,
or at least not intentionally.
I 100% thought this entire time that like it was a direct riff, and I was like, ha, cool.
Um, I think the fact that Joyous Explorer's buff lasts a little bit longer and gives trample is semi-relevant, but usually if you're overrunning, you only need to do it once.
Yeah, I think
You,
I'd rather just dodge the creature removal that my opponent
yep,
doesn't really have.
yep,
So
I
that's
think
why
that's
I
reasonable.
think Protect the Farm is better than Joy's Explorer.
Um,
Although I'm not that high on Joy's Explorer anyway. I don't think that the landfall deck wants that effect because Splitting Bloom already does everything you want and more, and I don't think you want more than 4 copies of that effect.
One other thing to briefly consider when we're talking about redundancy is EDH is a format where that helps a lot.
Also true.
Um, and I'm sure we have some silly like Naya Lands-ish commander.
Yeah,
Just like that feels like something that someone would have made.
Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
you're telling me
That someone
Antali
is probably me.
Archdruid isn't legendary? Sounds kind of fake, TBH.
Oh, Timus. Timus is the one you want. Use
Oh yeah,
these cards with
Timus.
Timus.
Yeah, yeah, agreed.
All right. So Shemesh is a card that I think is actually absurd. It's a 3 mana 4/4 with Assault 2 red green. And when assaults, other creatures you control get +2/+2 and gain trample until left turn. This card is like the ideal top end for a red-green aggro deck, and has to make you seriously reconsider a lot of your other options for 3 mana. Like, I think Katie still gets there over this if you have counters, but I think a lot of other things don't. And the fact that this also has counter synergy just makes a lot of those other cards stock go further up.
Yeah,
Like,
I love the idea of this card in like a non.
yeah, like if you curve Primal Ruffian into the 2-drop we were just talking about into Shemesh, turn 4, activate Shemesh, you're going to hit for a truckload.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like you're already getting quite a solid rate at just the. And I think it's cards like this that make me like much less high on cards like Wandering Warden as well, because it's
Yeah.
just you're getting so much more of a clear upside on both ends
Yep.
of the card. So yeah,
Shemesh is just clear value. You can it is what you see is what you get, and what you see is something beautiful. So
it's very gruel in that it's not hard to see how the card.
yeah.
Yes. And of course, if it's leading the Divine Lovers, you can only assume.
Okay.
So the next card is, if I had to play a EDH commander from this recent update, this is the one I would pick because I think this card does absolutely hilarious things. I don't think this card gets there in MSEM, but just for EDH players, this is blue, green, and 4 for a 5/5. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, if you haven't used the ability this turn, you may have that land enter the battlefield as a copy of any non-land permanent on the battlefield. So it turns all of your lands, all of your ramp spells into clones, and that's just beautiful. I don't think it's like broken, especially because it's only once per turn, but you can do some really silly things with it, especially if you have fetch lands and you start getting lands into play on your opponent's turns. Um, you have the Araloo curse that allows you to play lands whenever your opponent plays lands. You know, this card does exactly what you would want it to. Not really anything more, not really anything less. It's very much not there for MSEM, but you can do some degenerate and janky things in MSEDH, I assume.
Yeah, the
One of
only
the
real
best
format.
commanders. I think
Uh,
this is one of the best EDH commanders in the format for sure.
it is a 6-drop and it's a 7-drop if you want to immediately get
Yeah, if we have
value
like
off of
if
it.
you're if you're
Like,
playing CDH and you're in these colors, you might as well go for Gleaming Mirror Weaver, and then you're like,
I
oh.
was gonna say, Gleaming Mirror Weaver kind of makes this look
Okay,
like a hack.
yeah,
Though to
yeah.
be fair,
But
Gleaming
Gleaming Mirror
Mirror
Weaver
is
is also
kind of a disgusting
broken.
card. Yeah.
Yeah, like
Like I think
when
the only reason that I haven't used my executive MSEDH powers to do something about it is I feel like it's just it doesn't matter because MSEDH isn't played enough and Gleaming Mirror Weaver is played even less. So
it's casual, yeah. Um, okay, so Sunblessed Order, 1 red white 2/3. Whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, this deals 1 damage to each opponent, and you gain 1 life. Don't play this in Soul Sisters. Don't play this in Clerics. Those decks have way better things to do. The only reason this card is on this list is, until now, our cheapest Impact Tremors effect was a 5-drop. Now we have it as a 3-drop. If someone finds some infinite combo to infinitely recur a creature, such as, for instance, Rilken, Forcefield Keeper, and something, this would have killed with it. That's not the world we live in. Thank God.
but
Um,
it could be the world we live in the future. Just I believe in the people of the future.
is Breaker of City still worth talking about?
What?
I think
Post
so.
nerf,
Sure.
I think we can briefly mention it. Let's do
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
I'm still just looking at it though.
So it's 2 mana vehicle. It's a 3/3, and with crew 1. Whenever it hits a player for combat damage, you get to make a 1/1 with vigilance, and then you can pay 2 to give it trample until end. So I think this card kind of is an army in a can a little bit, as long as you get it going, because obviously the tokens it makes can crew
Crew
it,
itself.
and then it can just keep hitting your opponent. And I like that it gives an aggro player tools to pressure a control deck without ever having to commit that much to the board. Like all you have to do is go 1-drop into this, and then you can just hold back and like make your opponent have a super.
I do think that this. So I think you are correct in that description. I don't like that it doesn't actually help you recover from a board wipe unless you've been playing smart. This is very much and it is also a card that kind of gets stonewalled by mid-range decks. Like a 3/3
Yeah.
is good stats, but it's not good stats in the face of a 3-mana 4/4 or a
So what
3
you're
mana
saying
3/4.
is we should have left in the natural trample.
I mean, I
Oh.
still think it has the same issues with natural trample. It's just marginally less punishing against decks that run 2/2s.
Yeah, I really think that I would have much preferred it to keep the natural trample, because I think that as is, I'm not sure that it gets there at all. And then like with trample, I still don't think it would have been oppressive. But
Yeah, I did
especially
not take
given
a
that
vote on that.
Pith Wilt is like the most played removal spell in the format, and that does cleanly answer this as well. Like it's not like it
As does
dodges a
Journey's
ton of
End.
removal. Yeah, it's not
Like,
like it dodges a ton of removal.
Yeah, and
I
like
think this
if you're
card
worried about wipes, you can even legend weaving in Flesh to Rot and kill this.
I think this card is like not this. I feel like there's a chance some people compared this card in their head to Smuggler's Copter, and I don't think there's a world in which you can make that comparison.
Yeah,
Um,
I also don't think it's even close to Sungler's Cop.
but I didn't vote on it, so I don't have any strong opinions. Um, so let's get on to Funerary Barge, which is a kind of weird and niche card, but it's good at what it does, I guess. Um, for
And
a
what it
one
does is
mana,
grow
it's a
big very fast.
yeah, like we don't have that many playable creatures that get bigger anytime a creature dies. Like I think the cheapest one we have is like a 3-drop, and it's like a 3 mana 1/1. The fact that this is only a creature when you want it to be, and it has this pseudo board wipe protection in the form of if they board wipe you and you kept a single creature in your hand back, you can usually crack in for a bunch.
Or like even if
I
you're
think this
playing
card
like
is
Departed
niche.
Evangel. Like, okay, you
Well,
board wiped me.
yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, now Departed Evangel has a condition to be replayed, right? Like all of those creatures now don't come back for free.
Oh wait, what is Departed Evangel's condition now?
If a creature died this turn, you can cast it.
Okay, okay.
Um, like I think Funerary Barge is neat and also very niche, but it's good in that niche, so it finds the corner, it sticks to it. Um, Serpent Staff is interesting. Um,
I'm not
for
high on Serpent Staff at all, but yeah, go
So I
ahead.
think there's a specific context for Serpent Staff. I think the fact that it is a creature you can tutor with equipment tutors is the appeal of this card. It's not a great creature. It's no Batter Skull, but it is a creature that can pressure people. It can pressure planeswalkers. It can act as it can dissuade your opponent from attacking in. It's not a good card, There- but there's a circumstance in which you want to know it exists. Um, and I
And
think
so we're
in
letting
those circumstances,
we're
it's fine.
graciously informing the people.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
you
think
can't
it's also
get
a cool
too
design.
at speed. Like, yeah, onboard tricks are always kind of tricky to evaluate.
Yeah.
That's why they're called tricks.
Yes. Yes, I'm quite sure that's why. Splinter of Creation. This is no longer making Ramnap Excavator look like a chump. It's now only quite good. Um, if this enters the battlefield and draws you a fetch or two, it's like an Elvish Visionary. Um, if it draws two fetches, that's kind of decent. I don't think this card is like the actual nuts, but I think this card is definitely passable. And I think you also know whether you're a deck that wants this or not. It's pretty obvious.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that like in general, this is better than Crucible of Worlds, unless you are doing the like land recur thing.
Yeah, if you unless you're doing like
In
Contra
which
of
case, I think
Bounty.
Crucible of Worlds is actually just better.
Yeah, I think this is better if you're looking at a value piece. Like you're just interested in replaying a couple of fetch lands.
Yeah.
Or maybe you want a Perilous Passage someone twice, or you want to rebuy a Monument of Queens when it dies. I think one advantage of Crucible of Worlds that we haven't seen explored yet is its ability to add this kind of absurd inevitability to something like Monument of Queens, where it's really hard to shake as a threat. And this does not provide that.
Yeah. Wait, which set added Crucible of Worlds again?
Love Song.
Okay, your fault. I will remember.
Yeah,
Um.
Caillou will remember this.
Okay, so for our last colorless card, we have Tempered
Ah,
Oncolum. And
hate this
man,
guy.
did you say love it?
I said hate this guy.
Yeah,
I have
okay.
no positive feelings about Tempered Oncolin.
Yeah, you know what? I think those feelings probably were even more intense when this was all threes, right?
Yeah, when this card was, hey, Centaur Healer, you suck. Just get the fuck out of my house. This is my house now. I live here.
Yeah, so Tempered
Centaur
Oncolin for
Healer was
most
like,
of its
aw.
standard tenure was 3 mana. You can gain 3 life, or each opponent loses 3 life, and it was a 3/3. And for colorless, it was just kind of a dumb card. It
It
has
went
been
in
made
every
less.
deck.
Yeah, it has been made less dumb.
The best way to counter a Tempered Oncolin? Play your own goddamn Tempered Oncolin. Um,
Yeah, and when aggro was running it as 3 mana 3/3 bolt you, and so it was just kind of, and then it was like, oh, okay, well, I'll play the Tempered Oncolum so I can gain the life, and it was just like, oh god, this is kind of a mess, ain't it? Fortunately, I think this version
yeah,
is much
like,
more interesting in terms of like the granularity it offers.
yeah, I think this card is one, less abusable. Like 2 damage is a lot less than 3 damage when you're starting to flicker it a bunch. Um, I also think there's I think this card is a much worse control tool now. I think it's noticeably worse in aggro, especially because we have a lot of really good 2 drops in aggro decks. But I think it being a 3 mana 3/3 that gains you 3 in control was a really powerful effect, whereas a 2 mana 2/2 that gains you 2 is less so. It's still good. I just think most control decks have better tools.
Yeah, I think like
Yeah,
Dodger. Oh yeah, Dodger should talk about his own deck.
I'm not super convinced on Tempered Oculum in its current state. I was kind of unimpressed with it in my civil
Hmm.
audit. In theory, I was like, oh, I'm trying to drain people out with border makers already. Is both an artifact and a creature. This lets me drain them out. It's a 2 drop. Like it gets hit off Theocracy. So like lots of positives, but I just don't think the card had the pound for pound like meat to be worth playing like as a top deck because I wasn't quite a burn deck. I wasn't quite an artifact deck. Like there was just it just didn't quite fit. Um, but I do think that the card is a really good role player for a lot of strategies. Again, being able
Robots
to have a little
be
bit of
like,
reach out of your green deck or have some life gain in your red deck or whatever you want to do, like that's kind of nice if you're playing your artifact deck. This is definitely a pretty solid enabler. So I think it's good. Um, I don't think it's the kind of card that you'll see in every single deck.
Yeah.
Um,
All right. So Center of Culture is kind of up there with Temple of the False Gods in terms of, okay, this is an EDH soul land, but unlike Temple of the False Gods, this can tap for colorless even when you don't have its condition. But when you have civilized, it's a soul land. This is
yeah,
like,
this is like one of the best lands for EDH.
uh, best land. I mean, there's still Heart of Zadina
yeah, there's
land,
Heart of
right?
Zadina, and then
Besides
there's
Heart of
Talent
Zadina
Pool, both
and
of which
Talent
are
Pool,
more
which are
absurd.
abominations, but
Yeah.
like this is
I think
yeah.
I think this is one of the. I'm not going to say it's the best, but I think it is better than Temple of False Gods, and I think that card saw play in a lot of EDH decks. Whether it should or shouldn't, that's a different story. But it exists. Um, if you think you can have civilized on semi-frequently and you can afford a colorless land, run this. If you can't do either of those, really don't do that. Um,
It's a simple
Mana
equation.
Confluence
Oh yeah.
is
Speaking of other simple cards,
this card is no one has ever put this card in a deck that was intending to do anything less than cast 4 to 5 colors of spells and win the game before the life lost didn't matter. Most of my experience with Mana Confluence is in Dredge. Um, I recognize not everyone has that experience. I envy you. Um, but this card, I don't think it's going to break MSEM in half. I think on average, Nebula of Empty Gold is better,
Yeah, I was
unless
gonna ask,
you're
like Nebula usually ends up hitting you for less, right?
So the difference is, I think if you're in a deck that is running Nebula because you're a 3 color deck and you're just looking for like one more gold land, Nebula is better because you're usually going to tap Nebula more than 3 times. If you're a deck that intends to Nebula for 5, you're also probably not a deck that is spending 5 turns activating Nebula. You're trying to win the game. So run this. Now, of course, there's also a possibility that you should be running 4 copies of this and 4 copies of Nebula if you're a 5 color combo deck that's trying to win the game, like, basically instantly.
I think yeah, the important thing to note is I build a lot of decks. and now having access to 4 mana confluence plus 4 Nebula of Empty Gold means that I probably get to issue most of the annoying task of like finding the correct combination of fetches and duels. Like now I get to just put 4 of each in my deck and be like, ha.
Yeah, I think that like
It's
mana
gonna be a
base.
great situation until you run up against Blue Red Burn and you're like, oh, right, fuck, Plasmatic's still legal for some
I was
reason.
never going to win that matchup anyway.
Yeah, and I think
That's
that like
fair.
the
That's
thing
fair.
the thing is like our mana bases are already absurd. I think that like this doesn't really like it changes it in a sense that like we have more gold lands, but I think that like as we've seen from players like Hersey and stuff, you can build your mana base in a way that like you can have all the upsides of, you know, basics and not losing life too much to lands while also having like a reasonable like mana base. So I don't know, like it's I think it definitely makes 5 color easier, which is something that I'm a little wary about. But I think in general, I don't think it'll have too much of a negative effect.
I don't think this card fundamentally changes the mana scape of MSEM. I think if you're a deck where you know, God, I need more 5-color lands, you've known this. You've looked through Instigator many times to find lands that can tap for mana of any color. Now you have this. This probably simplifies your life. But there's still decks that want to run 5 colors, like Egg's Rainbow Road deck, where you do not want to run this because you're planning on tapping your lands a bunch. You care about the late game. But, there's plenty of decks that don't. So run in those.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I think with that, that takes us to the end of our Scriptures of Urshad review.
Oof.
That was a
That was
doozy. That was we're right on
Didn't make
3 hours.
in about 3 hours. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So thank you all once again for joining me. Um, so if you somehow found this and you sat through it all without playing MSEM, play MSEM. If you're already playing MSEM, I would recommend that you check out the drafts of Scripture of Urshad. It's a great format in its own right, and I would love for all of you to come and experience the limited
Wait, when is
environment.
that? That's tomorrow or Friday?
So those are actually on Thursdays. So the
Oh,
Scriptures
right.
of
Okay. Yeah. I
so
will
the
be there.
Scriptures of Urshad drafts are going to be November 12th and November 26th, and they start at essentially 8 p.m. Eastern, I think is what this says. Yeah, 8 p.m. Eastern.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
Sick.
hope to see you all there. And unless does anyone have anything else to say? No?
I'm Gucci.
Free angel touched.
Oh, okay. So we only have bad comments. So to prevent any more of those from being said,
Wait. No, if I think we should all sign off with a bad comment. I think this is
Okay.
actually a really fun idea.
okay, and bonus points if it's about the set.
I think that the best way to achieve civilized is by playing as many enchantment artifacts as you can find.
Is that even a bad comment?
I think you're gonna have a
No, no.
lot of
See,
trouble finding those in
no, no.
MSEM.
I think it's a really good comment. What Pip is secretly endorsing is that she's saying that we should let in Zoltan postmodern into the format.
Yes, that is exactly what I'm saying. I mean, hey, I'm the one who gets to pick what cards are up for the bonus sheet from Zoltan Postmodern, so just saying.
Okay,
We'll see
so
what we get.
Shit. Why can't I think of bad comments when no?
I think this Dodger. Don't worry. Just say just say something that you would normally say.
Just give us
Okay.
your hottest take here, Dodger.
My hottest take.
Oh no. Unleash
Okay.
the peppers.
My hottest take is that Theocracy will get nerfed.
Ooh.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's a take. Whew.
Ooh.
I think Theocracy is absolutely ludicrous.
You know,
It might not be this year, but I think that Theocracy will eventually, like with the high enough density of value 2-drops, it's just so good. After playing I was playing with it and like that deck had all shitty 2-drops and I was still running people over.
So there were 3 cards on my list of this card is too good and we might want to do something about it when I reviewed Scriptures of Urshad. Those cards were in fact Tempered Onclim, Jobaya, and Theocracy. And Theocracy was the only one we didn't do something about. So I don't
Yeah,
think the guess is entirely off.
see, I'm a genius.
So actually,
Confirmed.
Dodger actually failed this part because it was supposed to be bad comments.
Okay, bad comment. I think that. Okay, you know what? I'll just leave my bad comment in Discord for everyone.
Yeah,
And
so
I don't
my
even
my
have
bad
one. I don't
comment.
even
I
have
think
one
I
in mind.
already
I
fully
will.
expressed my bad comment by leaving Tithe Official on this list. Do I need to do anything more?
You know
I
what?
had to
I
think
will
very
bring
hard for
plenty
a
of
bad
bad
comment.
comments for the Alara review.
Oh,
Okay,
Lord.
Or maybe
Dodger's
you.
storing his power. Okay, and
Oh,
Kevin,
God,
you
yes.
have the dubious honor of leaving us off.
Wait, didn't Kevin start us off
Yeah.
with the
Yeah,
bad
Caillou.
comments?
Wait, what was the bad?
Free,
It was
free
so bad I've
Angel
already
Touch was
forgot.
the bad comment.
Oh, that was okay, but I
I
thought
think
it was
the
something
Angel
relevant to
Touch
the
land.
set. Something relevant to the set.
Hmm.
Off the
Relevant.
top. Sorry. I just think, for the record, by the way, the Angel Touched lands, other than the conspiracies, are like probably in the bottom 10 of cards that we absolutely can never unban.
So that means they're closest to not being banned.
24. No, the other way, 27.
Oh, okay.
So
Okay.
of the 27 cards, like, if we were to start banning them, unbanning them one at a time, I think
They
the
would
Angel
be
Touch
among
lands
the
would
last
be
10.
within the last 10.
Oh my
Um,
god.
yeah,
Wait,
those cards are
does that
really
include the
not
soul
okay.
lands?
Yes, I think the last 10 are probably Soul Lands and Angel Touch land.
Oh my
Wild.
god.
Okay, so Kevin, do you have your hot take for us or bad take?
Hmm.
Kevin, be like,
Uh,
I only say
my
good
hot take.
things.
My hot take. I think in like a blue black list, you could run Oppress the Weak without any artifacts or any enchantments, because just being able to cane dancer it is just that good.
I think Blues Eclipse would agree with you there. So you've
I
got
don't,
one
I-
I
fan
don't hate
right
that
there.
take. I'm
I
actually pretty
definitely
alright
agree.
with
This is a bad take.
it.
Okay, and with
I
that,
agree.
thank you all for joining us for this
Wait.
review.
What about you, Kaya?
I already said mine was the Tithe Official one. I don't need to say anything
Yeah.
else. Y'all,
Oh, I thought you were harassing Dodger about
Caillou's
that.
Caillou was Tithe Official as a playable Magic card and works well in this format. To which we
Yep.
all said, no, that's absolutely not true.
yeah,
Wait, what's
yeah.
That's the 2/2 first strike bad Thalia.
Okay.
Oh, that card
Anyway,
is-
anyways, if you all are done, this is Caillou and Co. wrapping up. See you all next week for our Alara review.